my dreams, I walk free in the city streets. 2,500 days plus 50 weeks, doing hard time for these WikiLeaks, trying to bring the truth out. Man, it only gets you heat, and then they gag you. You don't get to speak, and when you get the leak, they try to hit delete. The masses of the masses, they want the shit discreet. That's why my middle finger's up to these sick elites. Free speech, it's the freedom of press. Take your deepest, darkest secrets, never leave them unsaid. If I'm a thief, then I'm a thief for the people you dread. The people of the red, white and blue, you keep them in bed. Seeing the sheep, keep them asleep, deceiving the weak. Keep seeking the leaks till you cease, and I see your defeat. Until I'm deceased underneath a freezing red sheet. Become a dead man, then I hit the switch and release. When Goldman Sachs is your creditor, you kill the messenger. Stories axed by the editor, you kill the messenger. Pay to play on the regular, you kill the messenger. Need a solace, any questioners, you kill the messenger. And outside my window a figure quickly creeps. They dark as night like some motherfucking chimney sweeps. Whiskey with my Mickey keeps dying in my kidneys weak. Silence in my risky tweets is what the grand jury seeks. I'm wanting peace like 7 years in Tibet. Now rest in peace like 7 years under threat. Cause I've released 7 vaults, they upset. They ended the rape sentence, but the US still insists to rest. I guess it's a sin to take the truth and disseminate. MLK to Gandhi, take aim and eliminate. And I don't say I'm great, just wanna say what's fake. But if they kill me, a million others will take my place. The CIA's post like a knife the sharpest. All hypocrisy, lies, and heartless. They want to stop me, my life make my heart quit. Cause democracy dies in the darkness. When Goldman Sachs is your creditor, you kill the messenger. Stories axed by the editor, you kill the messenger. Pay to play on the regular, you kill the messenger. Need a solace, any questioners, you kill the messenger. When the vote count is irregular, you kill the messenger. You caught spying on a senator, you kill the messenger. Removing voters from the register, you kill the messenger. Need a solace, any questioners, you kill the messenger.
Kill the messenger. Kill the messenger. Kill the messenger.
In my dreams, I walk free in the city streets. 2,500 days plus 50 weeks, doing hard time for these WikiLeaks, trying to bring the truth out. Man, it only gets you heat, and then they gag you. You don't get to speak, and when you get the leak, they try to hit delete. The masses of the masses, they want the shit discreet. That's why my middle finger's up to these sick elites. Playing on the regular,
You kill the messenger.
free speech is the freedom of press. Take your deepest, darkest secrets, never leave them unsaid. If I'm a thief, then I'm a thief for the people you dread. The people of the red, white and blue, you keep them in bed. Seeking the sheep, keep them asleep, deceiving the weak. Keep seeking the leaks till you cease, and I see your defeat. Until I'm deceased underneath a freezer red sheet. Become a dead man, then I hit the switch and release. When Goldman Sachs is your creditor,
Kill the messenger.
and outside Outside my window, a figure quickly creeps. They dark as night like some motherfucking chimney sweeps. Whiskey with my Mickey keeps. Dying in my kidneys weak. Silence of my risky tweets. What the grand jury seeks. I'm wanting peace like 7 years in Tibet. Now rest in peace like 7 years under threat. Cause I released 7 vaults. They upset. They ended the rape sentence. But the US still insists to rest. I guess it's a sin to take the truth and disseminate. And I'll pay the Gandhi. Take him and eliminate. And I don't say I'm great. Just wanna say what's fake. But if they kill me, a million others will take my place. The CIA's post like a knife the sharpest. All hypocrisy, lies, and heartless. They want to stop me, my life make my heart quit. Cause democracy dies in the darkness. Cause democracy dies in the darkness. You kill the messenger. You kill the messenger. Democracy dies in the darkness. Feeling cold now, I got the heater on. Feeling sold out, even though I'm keeping strong. But can I hold out when every bit of freedom's gone? They want me rolled out, never to sing freedom song. I wanna see the sky, I wanna feel the rain. But gotta keep away from windows, that's some window pane. It's just a shame, couldn't have planned out all our dreams. Now I scream. Cause there's a man in the machine, but the train is off the tracks, and damn, it's losing steam. I wanna call Christine, I haven't seen since 013. I'm missing life like 3 strikes each night. Seems like 3 nights ain't right. Can't fight, space light, hate life. Wanting to be snake-like, shedding off this gray life. In the dark, can't make light. But where I'm headed now is brake lights. Where I'm headed now, they break lights. Counting days like brake lights, feeling weight like brake lights. Had a great life, brake lights, brake lights, brake lights. Out of place like brake lights, in my face like brake lights. Counting days like brake lights, brake lights, brake lights. Sit here asking, what have I done? If these strings were cut, I'd see my son. And if I could just fly from this place, then I'd hold you in my love embrace. And if I could just speak to you now, I'd renew my vow and be in the now. Is this me in the now? Wanna remove stress from your brow and pay you back some way, somehow. But it's painted black, can see the way back now. But how's the house and how's your mom? I doubt the way the media portrays me makes you hate me. But to think you see that daily makes me crazy, that just ain't me.
This is without a doubt going to be this generation's Free Mandela movement. Every single generation must fight again the same battles that previous generations have fought.
Brake lights, counting days like brake lights, brake lights, brake lights, brake lights, brake lights, brake lights. Brake lights, brake lights, brake lights. I walk free in the city streets. 2,500 days plus 50 weeks. Doing hard time for these WikiLeaks. Trying to bring the truth out, man, it only gets you heat. And then they gag you. You don't get to speak. And when you get the leak, they try to hit delete. The masses of the masses, they want the shit discreet. That's why my middle finger's up to these sick elites. Free speech, it's the freedom of press. Take your deepest, darkest secrets, never leave them unsaid. If I'm a thief, then I'm a thief for the people you dread. The people up the red, white and blue, you keep them in bed. Seeing the sheep, keep them asleep, deceiving the weak. Keep seeking the leaks till you cease, and I see your defeat. Until I'm deceased underneath a freezing red sheet. Become a dead man, then I hit the switch and release. When Goldman Sachs is your creditor, you kill the messenger. Stories axed by the editor, you kill the messenger.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the 19th Unity for J Online Vigil for WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange. I'm Joe Laurie, Editor-in-Chief of Consortium News.
And I'm Elizabeth Voss, Editor-in-Chief of Disobedient Media.
Julian Assange is a wanted man because he's published classified information given to him by whistleblowers that reveal the crimes and corruption of government officials around the world, not just in the United States.
But it is the US, the supposed beacon of freedom and democracy and press freedom around the globe, that wants him extradited to the United States for the crime of publishing if he has interfered with the interests of some of the most powerful people in the world by revealing their machinations to the public.
And that's why Julian Assange has been a refugee in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for the past 6 years, though he has not been charged with a crime by either the United Kingdom or Sweden. He knows that the second he steps back onto British territory, he will be arrested and sent to the US, where he is unlikely to receive a fair trial and will likely spend the rest of his life in prison. There is almost certainly a sealed indictment of Julian Assange. Certainly there is a grand jury going on in Alexandria, Virginia courthouse. That's going to be the focus of our discussion today, because the powerful interest that who he has exposed, they want him to pay.
It is a historic test of press freedom. The corporate media, which once profited from him, has now abandoned Julian Assange, and they could face the same threat to their freedom to publish classified information were he to be arrested.
So we're going to look at the headlines of the past week, and the main headline, and the one we're going to be focused on, happened earlier today in the U.S. in a courtroom in Alexandria, Virginia. Chelsea Manning, one of the most important sources of a leak to WikiLeaks, the video that's known around the world as collateral murder. Chelsea Manning was a private in the U.S. Army, an intelligence analyst, and leaked disturbing videos of what appeared to be prima facie evidence of U.S. war crimes. It was given to WikiLeaks and published, and pretty much put WikiLeaks on the map. Chelsea Manning was then exposed by someone she had put trust in, and she was arrested, put on trial, and convicted of under the Espionage Act, and sent to prison for 35 years. While in prison, she was tortured, held in solitary confinement, which was considered torture, and otherwise badly mistreated. And Barack Obama, as he was leaving office at the beginning of 2017, I should say, commuted Chelsea Manning's sentence. In other words, what she had served to that point was going to be all that she served plus 4 months. So 4 months after Obama left office, Chelsea Manning walked out of prison and was a free woman. And at the time, the White House said that they were commuting her sentence because they drew a distinction with Ed Snowden, saying that that there were stark differences. Josh Earnest, one of the White House spokesmen in Obama's administration, said that there was a, quote, pretty stark difference between Miss Manning's case and Mr. Snowden's. That's the New York Times. And Chelsea Manning, quote, is somebody who went through the military criminal justice process, was exposed to due process, was found guilty, was sentenced for her crimes, and she acknowledged wrongdoing, Ernest said. Mr. Snowden instead fled into the arms of an adversary and has sought refuge in a country that most recently made a concerted effort to undermine confidence in our democracy. We could talk for 3 hours just about that statement, Elizabeth, I think. So for one thing, Ed Snowden made it very clear why he did not go through that so-called whistleblowing process, because he had seen what had happened to Tom Drake and decided, and to Chelsea Manning, and decided to not do that. And second of all, Snowden, of course, did not flee into the arms of America's adversary. He wound up stuck in the airport in Moscow en route somewhere else, and that's why he wound up in Russia. But it's very convenient to blame Snowden for going to the so-called adversary, Russia, and the whole nonsense about Russia making a concerted effort to undermine confidence in our democracy when the American ruling class does that every day. So we could talk about this quite a lot, but I think we're going to have a little bit more that you're going to read, I believe, from CNN. Is that right?
Right. And basically, Chelsea Manning this morning was jailed for refusing to testify against Assange. That's the really big news of the day. And from CNN, we have a quote saying that a judge held Chelsea Manning in contempt and that she is being detained. And her lawyer says, quote, "As everybody knows, Chelsea has tremendous courage. Our primary concern at this point is her health while she is confined, and we will be paying close attention." And that was from Moira Meltzer-Cohen, Manning's attorney, who told that made that statement to reporters outside a federal courthouse in Virginia.
That was this morning in Virginia. Manning can be held, CNN goes on to say, for the term of the grand jury and not longer than 18 months. Quoting Meltzer Cohen, Manning's lawyer, asked if Manning was prepared to stay in prison for the full 18 months. Meltzer Cohen said, quote, "We're not there yet." She added that it was quite likely that they would appeal the order. Manning refused to answer questions about her 2010 public disclosures of military and diplomatic secrets before a grand jury earlier this week. Her presence before the grand jury this week suggests prosecutors continue to investigate and pursue charges against Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks.
And as Joe was explaining just a minute ago, Manning is a former Army intelligence analyst who spent nearly 7 years imprisoned after she was arrested for the massive leak to WikiLeaks. She was sentenced to 35 years in prison, but that was commuted by President Barack Obama in 2017.
Now, some reactions. WikiLeaks official tweet said, and I quote, this was 3 hours ago, whistleblower Chelsea Manning has been placed in jail to coerce her to testify against Julian Assange. Whistleblowers are now being forced to testify against journalists, a new angle in the attack on media freedom. WikiLeaks also tweeted, note that Manning is not jailed as a, quote, punishment. She has formerly been jailed to coerce her into testifying against our journalists, including Assange, for publishing the truth about the U.S. government. She will remain in jail until she breaks and complies or wins on appeal.
We also have a tweet from Glenn Greenwald, who said 5 hours ago, quote, "This is disgusting and all due to the efforts of the DOJ to criminalize the publication of classified information in order to prosecute WikiLeaks and Assange, something all press freedom groups, major newspapers, and even the Obama DOJ said would be a major threat to press freedom." And joining today, I believe we'll just continue to discuss some of these events as we move forward through the vigil. So
that's correct. So we have a lot we can unpack there, Elizabeth. This was not unexpected. First of all, Chelsea had come out yesterday and told the press in front of the courthouse in Alexandria that she would likely be going to jail because she refused to answer questions of a secret process, the grand jury. She criticized the entire grand jury process, saying there was only one other country in the world that still had grand juries. So there's a matter of principle here about not accepting the grand jury as a legitimate legal forum, because, of course, in a trial, which Chelsea Manning went through in 2010, obviously it's in public and you're allowed a defense. Where in a grand jury, it's secret and you're not allowed a defense. So she cited her First, Fourth, and Sixth Amendment rights to not answer questions in the grand jury. And I find the Sixth Amendment one of particular interest because that one is the one that guarantees Americans under the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution a public trial and a right to a defense. So she had that, of course, in the trial. In her court-martial, it was a military court Of course, that sentenced her to 35 years in prison, not a civilian one. Whereas today, it's a civilian grand jury, but in the grand jury, those Sixth Amendment rights are not guaranteed. All you have is the prosecutor present and the grand jurors, and the prosecutor will just set out some kind of evidence to reach the bar of getting an indictment. And that's not obviously a conviction. So the amount of evidence, the fact that it can't be challenged, is quite significant. It is just convincing jurors that we have enough evidence, the government says, to indict someone, to formally accuse someone. And that is what they seem to be working on for Assange. We know that in that same courtroom last month, this indictment, whatever stage it's in, remains sealed. The judge, Leonie Brinkema, denied to admit that the indictment even exists, because the government, even though they admitted they made a mistake in revealing that there were in fact charges against Assange, they're maintaining the fiction that there's no indictment, and now we know for sure there is one because of this grand jury, Elizabeth. So she did not want to testify or to give testimony or evidence, rather, answer questions in a secret court without her Sixth Amendment rights being guaranteed.
Right, and I think that is incredibly brave, as many people have pointed out on social media and elsewhere, that this is a further example of Chelsea Manning's courage in the face of this type of persecution of whistleblowers and media outlets in general overall. And it puts, and I know we discussed this last week, but it really puts the establishment press in a very interesting situation, because these leaks that are being discussed in this grand jury are the ones that most establishment outlets supported and applauded in 2010. So they are now on a footing that has nothing to do with Russiagate, has nothing to do with Donald Trump or the events of 2016, and goes right to the heart of WikiLeaks' publications that they themselves supported, as well as the fact that the outcome of this issue will directly affect their ability to publish in future. So they should be very concerned and about this development for sure.
Yes, and that's a whole other issue we will explore, the fact that the media has continued to conflate this grand jury process with the Mueller investigation, and they have absolutely nothing to do with one another. This has to do with, as you, I think, Disobedient Media reported quite some time ago now, that this is about the 2010 leak and nothing to do with the 2016 election, although we saw Rachel Maddow continuing to lie about that on the air because it would undermine a lot of things she's been saying. So you got to keep the fiction going. But I want to know, what do you think that, she was being asked? I mean, she gave hours and hours of testimony in her trial and her court-martial. These questions were asked already. It seems from the WikiLeaks tweet and for everything we know, which is not a hell of a lot, that they're clearly going over again what happened when she leaked these videos and other documents to WikiLeaks. Then they're trying to get her, it seems like, to incriminate Assange some way, whether Assange asked for certain documents, whether he participated in the leak or not. What do you think about that? We were only speculating here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this was probably an attempt to create a situation or create some sort of inference that Julian Assange had solicited the information that Chelsea Manning leaked from her testimony, I believe, in 2013. That was never, established. As far as I am aware, there was never any, established evidence that she definitely spoke to Julian Assange. So I think that they're really trying to create that link where it possibly does not exist. And so I believe that's basically the heart of what they would have been trying to ask Chelsea Manning.
Right. And she's refused to go down that road simply because, on principle, she doesn't believe in the grand jury process. And number two, as WikiLeaks pointed out in their tweet, this is a source being forced to testify against the reporter or the publication that the source was working with. And that is, there's all kinds of dangerous things happening here legally and in terms of press freedom. And we've become accepting of this, it seems like, that we've reached a stage where the stakes are so high because of the knowledge of the activities of these people that WikiLeaks has brought us, that they will go beyond normal judicial procedures, it appears, to crush WikiLeaks. For example, as I've been pointing out, technically there is under the Espionage Act, there is a way to charge a publisher or a journalist for merely possessing and then disseminating classified information. But we've not seen that happen for a very long time because politically it's just not a very good thing for an administration to do, because it appears to go against the First Amendment, where the First Amendment prohibits the government from censoring a publication. After publication of classified information, the government is free to prosecute. And that appears to be what is happening here. And whereas the Obama administration not only commuted Chelsea Manning's sentence, but also decided not to prosecute Julian Assange for what his DOJ attorneys said was the New York Times problem, which, as Glenn Greenwald pointed out in his tweet, means that if WikiLeaks is prosecuted for publishing classified information, that opens up prosecution to the New York Times or CNN or any corporate media or anybody, any outlet that publishes classified information or that even repeats that classified information in a tweet, let's say. I mean, this is how absurd it can get. Anybody who retweeted anything that WikiLeaks published that was classified under the Espionage Act could theoretically also be liable, because we are not allowed to have it. Even though it's out in the public domain, it's still considered by the government classified.
I mean, can you imagine if we reach an actual situation where we would almost be looking at a reality that mirrors that infamous statement from CNN? I believe it was Cuomo who said that, you know, you're not allowed to look at these documents, only we can do that. I mean, in that case, even they wouldn't be allowed to do it. So
absolutely. And in fact, he was, I think, talking about the emails from which are which were never classified. I'm talking about not the Hillary Clinton private server emails, but the DNC Podesta emails were not classified. They were private property of those people. They were stolen as a crime, okay, but they weren't classified. The idea that in that case they could not prosecute Assange for publishing classified information. That's another thing, actually, that I don't think I've ever thought of before. If they want to get him, it's got to be, as you pointed out in your reporting earlier, it has to be on the Chelsea Manning era leaks, because that was classified, obviously. And it needed to be known by the public because this was evidence of what appears to be war crimes, killing of Reuters journalists, and then some good Samaritans who came to try to help those journalists were gunned down. And this is in black and white, literally in black and white video from American pilots who were committing at someone's orders what appears to be a war crime. Certainly that video should have showed up in a courtroom with those pilots and their superiors sitting in the docket. And instead it was Chelsea Manning who wound up being tried and convicted. And this is absolute perversion of justice that we see here.
Absolutely. No, to punish and to prosecute the messengers, the conveyors of true information about crimes committed by the government, that really is an indictment on the American justice system and the legal system being used to absolutely pervert justice completely. I don't think anyone could really argue otherwise. I think that, and it goes back to that Orwell quote that many have been tweeting in relation to Manning, is when you are punishing the people who expose liars, then you're being run by criminals.
An unfortunate conclusion that we would have to make, I think. She could stay in jail now for up to 18 months, according to her lawyer, or if she breaks, as WikiLeaks point out. She's not been convicted of a crime. There was no sentencing. There was no jury here. She's just being thrown in jail because she was refusing to talk, refusing to cooperate. It's contempt of court. And if she decided tomorrow to speak, I think they'll let her out, but she's not going to do that, it looks like. And could stay in there for the length of the grand jury, which has been going on, it appears, since 2010. So it's a 9-year sitting grand jury. Or if that doesn't end, then the full 18 months. What I don't know is, and I don't know if you can answer this either, is if she's released after the 18 months, and then they try to subpoena her again, and she refuses again, could they throw her again in jail for another 18 months? That's something I just don't know legally if that's the case, whether you can only be held in contempt once in a certain case, or they could try to do this over again. But for every indication is that this is absolutely an act of courage to give up her personal freedom, simply not to participate in what she sees to be a unjust process of secret grand jury, and not to be forced to testify against WikiLeaks and being tripped up to say something, or it didn't work. If they threatened jail, which they did, because now she's in jail, in order to make her speak, it certainly did not work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that the amount of courage that she's shown, not only now, but previously, and the fact that she's willing to go back to a state of imprisonment to stand on those principles is amazing when you compare that with the type of, level of integrity or lack thereof that we see in mainstream press pundits, the Maddows of the world. I think comparing the two really is stark, and it gives you some understanding of just how empty a lot of the outlets are out there that present themselves as standing up against the powerful. I think this is the real example of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a joke that they think that they're standing against it. They are the powerful. They're the mouthpiece of the powerful. That is obviously, and they're well compensated for that. And she's sitting in a jail cell somewhere. What I don't get, and is that, as she's pointed out in her statement, I think the day before, that she's already answered these questions. There was hours and hours of testimony during her court martial. What are they trying to ask her that she hasn't already been asked? What exactly could they try to get out of her? So I think going into that grand jury, she must have felt like this was not going to be on the up and up somehow, or that there was going to be some effort to intimidate her, to get her to say something that could incriminate Assange, because they're going to go over the same old questions, try to pick apart her testimony from earlier. It's very odd. And another thing that's odd is they're denying that this indictment even exists. And yet now we know there's a grand jury against Julian Assange. What else could she be testifying about? So,
of course, yeah. I think that the only answer I can come to as far as why they would be doing this, why they would want to bring her in to repeat the type of testimony that she gave already in 2013, I believe. The only answer I can come up with is they would be trying to get her to make some statement that, even when squinted at, through a glass, would be able to be twisted into evidence that Assange, asked her to leak or encouraged her to make additional leaks or something of that nature. That's the only conclusion I can come to. But of course, that's pure speculation.
Yeah, because yes, that is speculation. But if they want to get Assange for anything, they would probably want to nail him for participating in the leak itself, in the theft of the government property. Because even though they could use the Espionage Act, as I pointed out, they most likely do not want to do that, as previous administrations didn't do. But if they can get somehow some evidence to show that Assange had participated in the theft, then they think they could stand on that. This, again, is my interpretation. What's interesting is that Robert Perry, of course, the founder of Consortium News, who died in January of last year, I found an article of his from a couple of years ago in defense of Julian Assange, in which he wrote that in his own work as one of the premier investigative journalists in American history, really, having brought the Iran-Contra scandal to light for the Associated Press, Bob wrote that in the course of working with his many sources, that he often encouraged them to get information that he needed. So that this is part of the process of an investigative journalist. Now, I have no idea what whether they had any contact at all, Assange and Manning, right? We don't know that they even talked. There was, we don't even know that. But the idea that a journalist would talk to his or her source and try to get them to fill in, you're working on a piece and you need some information to fill in a gap or several gaps, and you're going to ask your source, can you provide anything that answers these questions? Now, is that participating in a crime? I mean, of stealing government data? So in other words, Bob is saying that this is also very common and routine behavior for a journalist to be working on a story to try to get their sources, if they were leaking classified information, to give them more. That's what you need. You want more. So it's beyond troubling. This. Have we got a guest coming in here?
We do. We have Lee Stranahan with us.
So Lee, if you're able to hear us, we want to welcome you in.
I believe he's facing the same audio situation that we were facing earlier. So Lee, you may have to click something about using your computer's audio if you see an alert about that.
On the bottom left-hand side, the problem is he can't hear either, because I couldn't hear.
Well, we will deal with this.
We'll have the administration tell our administrators here, try to get Lee online. And in the meantime, I'm Joe Lauria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News, and I'm with Elizabeth Voss, the editor-in-chief of Disobedient Media, and we're discussing the news that broke just a few hours ago that Chelsea Manning is now in jail again after a sentence was commuted, but this time not for the crime of leaking classified information, but for refusing to testify to a grand jury. And we're going to be joined shortly by Lee Stranahan, co-host of show on Sputnik Radio that probably just got off the air a few hours ago. Fault Lines, thank you. I've been on the show. It's how embarrassing that I couldn't remember the title. Lee, can you hear us? Can you wave if you can hear us? Yes. Now can you unmute your mic?
I can do that.
Can you? Lee Stranahan, thank you for joining us today. Of course, we're discussing Chelsea Manning going to prison. You may have talked about that on your show this morning, although she may not have been in prison by the time your show ended. So can you weigh in on the issue of Chelsea Manning going to jail for refusing to testify to a grand jury today?
Sure. So the guy we had on the show this morning talking about this was Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Of course, he works with people like Vanessa Beeley doing great work on stories like Syria and other stories. And Patrick had sent me a note on Twitter yesterday saying that right now in the world of journalism today, Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange are clearly the most important people in the world today because, as he pointed out, what's going on here is unprecedented, which is you have a source going to jail for telling a grand jury about the journalists they were working with. And he talked about the heretofore sacrosanct, theoretically, relationship between journalists and sources, and how really frightening this is that this is happening. And you know, as I'm sure you've talked about, there's no clear end game right now. What Chelsea Manning did, I said this earlier on Twitter, what Chelsea Manning did here was absolutely heroic. I don't know how else to put it. When you're willing to basically go to prison rather than, the easiest thing in the world for Chelsea to have done here would have been to talk to the grand jury and get, you know, I don't think she's got anything major on Assange, but she knows that they're putting together a political case against Assange. It has nothing to do with whatever they're bringing the grand jury together on. It has to do with shutting up Assange because of the threat he poses to the establishment. And period. It has to do with shutting, you know, what I said on the show this morning too was that if you look at WikiLeaks record, the one thing that's very obvious is that they're one of the only media sources out there with that size reach, who has the guts to take on the military-industrial complex and the surrounding political establishment globally. So, and if it's a Republican administration, if it's a Democrat administration, it doesn't make any difference. And so that's what's going on. And so it's I guess fortuitous that these Unity for J things happen on Friday, so you can talk about this the day it breaks. But it really is a very, very, very dangerous situation, as I'm sure you see, Joe, with your wealth of experience here.
Well, I'm in the dark, like most people. What did you think they were trying to get her to say? What kind of questions do you think they were asking her?
I don't think it matters. In other words, to me, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get anything on Assange. It's very clear if they're bringing in Chelsea. See, here's what it is: the cover story has been, oh, it's Russian collusion and everything else. But what this grand jury is looking into now, if they're calling in Chelsea Manning, it's not about anything related to Russia. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, therefore, it's simply a desperate ploy to get Assange by any means necessary. And once you know that's what the government's trying, and the example I pointed out was, and I saw a tweet from Snowden earlier, Edward Snowden, where he was saying, well, gee, Manafort got 47 months and Assange, and he talked about what Chelsea ended up getting, years. And I said, just not that I know Snowden, but I said on Twitter, I said, it's the same people going after Manafort who are whatever you think about Manafort's lobbying activities or who he worked for, which I have big problems with, the reason they're getting him is not the reasons you or I might think you'd get a guy like Manafort. The reason they're getting him is the same reason that Luke Harding at The Guardian, let's remember, tried to say that he did say that Manafort had met Assange, right? Julian Assange is the guy, let's face it, on this whole Trump-Russia collusion investigation by Mueller, Assange is the key witness. He's the person who could clear it all up and has offered to clear it up. He's offered to clear up everything. Manafort has no interest in getting to the truth on this story, none. If he did, he'd get Julian Assange on the record. Doesn't want to do that. So, the grand jury prosecution is a way of keeping Assange from ever talking to the public again. That's very clear to me what they're trying to do.
And they're
That's
also
an interesting take. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, please, Elizabeth. Please.
I was just going to say that's a very interesting take. I had not thought of that angle where this could be as much an intimidation tactic against Assange and an effort to keep him silenced as far as his ability to reach the public, as much as it is an attempt to actually create some type of evidence or gain some type of evidence against him.
No, yeah. See, once I forget who mentioned that to me, but once I heard it, it's obvious. It's obvious in the sense that if you look at the placement of the Harding story, if you look at when he was silenced, and part of the problem is there is I supported Trump in 2016 because I thought he was the best way to slow down the deep state, basically. Now, at this point today, I don't think that's the case anymore. And I'm looking at people like Tulsi Gabbard, but what they did was immediately got Trump to sort of throw Manafort and Assange and all these other people under the bus. The neocons who've surrounded Trump. And I don't know if it's possible to pull back from that, but the neocons who surrounded Trump clearly wanted to basically gaslight him so he would get as far away. That's why he made that stupid statement Trump did a couple months ago. I haven't heard it. Julian Assange, I don't really know who that is. It's like, that's not, we know who he is. But the people around him have frightened Trump so much that he's just got to act like, oh, I don't have any idea who that is. But it's not about getting Trump. It's about the establishment keeping their stranglehold on power. They're doing the same thing to Trump that they're doing to Corbyn, that they're doing to Gabbard. And it's the same people behind it. And it's very obvious. If you look at the Integrity Initiative story that Kit Clarenberg and other people have been doing such a good job of exposing, that Integrity Initiative group, it's the same people who are attacking Assange, are going after Trump, are going after Corbyn. It's not ideological. It's anybody who does not 100% toe the establishment line, they want to shut down.
Because they feel threatened by these people, clearly.
Yeah.
I think they'd have to understand, even subconsciously, that their power rests on very weak foundation, and they cannot have even the slightest truths being uttered about how they got power, how they maintain power, what they do while they're in power, like shoot down Reuters journalists and people coming to help them. And Chelsea Manning is the one who had to pay to exposing their crimes. I mean, I can't say that often enough, that Chelsea Manning went to jail, not the people who committed that crime. And what we've also got going here, as Elizabeth and I were discussing, is this absolutely purposeful conflation of the 2010 case that Manning's being asked about and the 2016 election. And they have nothing to do with one another. Caitlin Johnstone, of course, the Australian writer who has often appeared on our vigils and whose work I republish at Consortium News, had an excellent piece the other day in which she exposed Rachel Maddow for actually doing this and how she did this by, even though the Washington Post, she quotes the Washington Post saying that that U.S. officials speaking on condition of anonymity because of grand jury secrecy say the case is based on Assange's pre-2016 conduct, not the election hacks that drew the attention of special counsel Robert S. Mueller III. That's the Washington Post. And then you have instead Rachel Maddow on her show Tuesday night, as Caitlin says, quote, blatantly deceived her audience by weaving this story about the Chelsea Manning subpoena into her conspiratorial Russiagate ramblings about Roger Stone, despite those stories having absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with one another. And then she quotes Maddow saying, and because of the criminal case against Roger Stone, you should also know that today in federal court in Virginia, a little bit of drama. Today in federal court in Virginia, and this was last Tuesday, the U.S. attorney himself, the top of that prosecutor's office, the Eastern District of Virginia, U.S. attorney himself personally turned up in court for a sealed hearing today that appears to be about some sort of legal case potentially involving WikiLeaks and or Julian Assange. So because of the criminal case against Stone, you should also know that today, nothing whatsoever to do with one another. How do we counter this, Lee?
Well, I got to say, these Unity for J events have been one, the part that was controversial to some people, which is that you've got people from the right and the left, is the best part of this, because the fact is this separation that when you stay in a media bubble, I'm just going to watch Fox because I don't trust MSNBC, or I'm just going to watch MSNBC because I don't trust Fox. If you're just staying in the mainstream media bubble, it's very easy to fool you because you don't see that it's the same people. Well, wait a minute. It's the same people on MSNBC and Fox essentially telling the same story, which all ends up keeping the perpetual war machine going. Oh, gee, what's going on? So I think these events are important. I think, and sites like yours and Elizabeth's and Patrick's, there's a handful. Everybody, we know who's good. We know who's honest at this point. You can name, and there's not more than a dozen or so sites that do it. But the fact that you guys are still publishing great work, Joe, over at Consortium, and the fact that Disobedient does such good work, and the other sites that we know that are out there that are bringing people just the facts on all of these stories, I think that's the best thing we can do right now. I've noticed, I'll tell you what I do. My big enemy, and again, I'm on the right. Do you know who my big enemy right now is? Fox. All of my fire is aimed at Fox. And I'm telling people Fox is hiding information from you. If I were on the left, my big enemy would be MSNBC. I would want to take people and say, look, you need to understand the media you're being fed is not feeding you the truth. And I can prove it to you. Let's look up, shouldn't this story be major? Like the Genie Energy story that I'm sure we all know a little about. That should be a major mainstream media story if you're going after Kushner or whatever. Okay, nobody's covered it. Not one single mainstream media outlet has ever written a single story about Genie Energy, their connections to Kushner, the connections to the Trump administration, the fact that they hold the exclusive drilling rights to Golan Heights oil. Where should every media outlet be on this Chelsea Manning story? New York, you know this, Joe. having worked in the mainstream media and then at the UN for so long, the New York Times and now CNN, they love to brag about they're the protectors of First Amendment freedoms and freedom of speech, and they're against Trump because he threatens it. They should be all over this Manning story. This morning, Ford Fisher, who we've had on the show, he showed the video. There were like 4 people there. There's no media coverage of this. So this omission trick that the mainstream media does, they omit stuff, is very easy to point out to people. And I think going for the low-hanging fruit, if, like I say, if you're on the left, explain. That's why Michael Tracy, I think, does very good work on this. Be the loyal opposition and convince your side. Don't just attack the other side, because it'd be easy. The easiest thing for me to do would be to attack Ocasio-Cortez every day. I'm a Republican, and my audience would eat up that. Right? They love that. I don't do that. I disagree when I see it, but mostly I'm like, that's a huge distraction. The real issue is Assange, the deep state. Those are the real issues. So that's what I think.
Be curious to ask you, many people who consider themselves genuine progressives or leftists to recoil at the idea that Hillary Clinton calls herself a progressive, for example, or that MSNBC calls themselves left or progressive, or that they're seen that way. Many people talk about the left wing in the United States as being Hillary Clinton, where from my point of view, and a lot of people's point of view, she's center right. She is not a left-wing person at all, and MSNBC in particular is not. They're pro-establishment, without doubt, whether that be the Democratic establishment for MSNBC or the Republican establishment for Fox. Do you, from a right point of view, do you also see that Fox is not really genuinely right-wing, the way a lot of people on the left see MSNBC as not really being left-wing?
Yes, and the thing I talk about these multiple valid political axes. In other words, a left-right axis in a traditional, like, let's say Democrat Republican, right? That's just a tool we use to try to label people, which is valid, right? It's valid to say John McCain was a Republican and Hillary Clinton was a Democrat, right? That's valid because it's true. But just the same way that I use an analogy in this, I say, look, am I short or fat? And the answer is
both.
I could be both, right? I could be both, right? And in fact, I would argue that I am. And so what I say is like, look, Democrat, Republican, that's fine. That's not wrong, but it's not the whole picture. Left, right, that's not wrong, but it's not the whole picture. Globalist, nationalist, that's not right. And populist, elitist. And so I think the most important access in the world today is that populist, elitist one. And there are left populist, and there are right populist, and there are left elitist and right elitist. And the left populist and the right populist tend to agree, for instance, on the military-industrial complex. That's where you get Rand Paul and Tulsi Gabbard. Well, I think it's valid to call them left and right. And on a lot of issues, if you just looked at them on abortion, let's say, let's be very narrow, you'd go, gee, they seem different. But if you look at them on opposition to regime change wars, to use the term Tulsi Gabbard put into parlance, there they are. And so I found that, wait, hi, Ez, how you doing?
It's okay. We need more
We've
guests.
got an additional guest, yeah.
Yeah.
No, we have an additional guest as we're doing something. There we go. So that's my 6-year-old. But I think that letting people, you don't have to say to them, no, it's all a myth, because it's not a myth exactly. It's just not the only way to measure things. And once you overcome that bias that people have, because they identify as a Democrat or Republican. Okay, that's fine. You stay that way. But how do you feel about the military budget, let's say? Let's say you're on the right. So you kind of oppose over government spending, right? Well, the military budget and that $21 trillion that went missing, that might, as a fiscal conservative, you might have some issues with that, right? Now, I could make a left argument against that, but it's still, we're seeing the same problem. We're seeing that the military-industrial complex is completely out of control, and that's how you get McCain and Clinton on exactly the same page. That's where they are on Ukraine and Syria and all these other stories. So,
Elizabeth, please.
I was going to agree with you, saying out of control is an understatement when it comes to the out of control military spending and, imperialist wars across the globe, for sure. And I just want to add that we also have another guest with us. We have Brian Becker, who I'm bringing in now. Hopefully their audio won't have any problems, but if we do have any problems, we can watch the collateral murder video as well.
Brian, welcome.
Hi, Brian.
Before we bring you in to talk about Chelsea, I wanted to ask one more question of Lee. When he mentioned Genie Energy in Golan Heights, the fact that still there, Lee?
Yeah, sure am. Yep.
That nobody's reporting that. From my understanding, Rupert Murdoch, a few other people have big investments in that. I wonder if that has something to do with Fox not reporting on that.
100% it has to do with that. I'll tell you one of the tools I've used that I found is a good one. I used to have the problem of how do you prove the media is not talking about a story? And I've discovered a really good trick. And it's just a Google search trick. Is you say to people, for instance, whoever your side is, like I'm on the right. So I say, okay, so you'd think that Fox News would be reporting like they should report, since Rupert Murdoch has been on the board of Genie Energy, they should mention that in their story. Like, by the way, note, right? So what you do is, it's this trick in Google that if you type in any search term and then the word site, SITE : with the site name, like site:/foxnews.com, you can look on that specific site. You're not doing a search of the whole internet just on that site. So let's say MSNBC. They don't like Jared Kushner or Trump. This is a big scandal. Ira Greenstein, who's the president of Genie Energy, was on the Trump transition team picking ambassadors and foreign policy people. That's a conflict, right? So you go, let's go Ira Greenstein, in quotes, site msnbc.com, and then you go, gee, they've never reported once on Genie Energy. And let's go CNN. Oh, look, they've never mentioned it. You'll get their stock price. But so I've been using that trick, and it to great effect, because it really, because you go, okay, well, this should be a story, right? Like Elizabeth, we were talking about out of control. $21 trillion missing from the defense budget is bigger than the national debt. Where's the reporting on it? Let's do it. Let's see if Fox, no, oh, look, gee, Fox has not covered it. And that's the way I've done. And by the way, it's great to see Brian. Brian also obviously is a host on Sputnik as well. And Brian's a great example of a left populist. And on Sputnik, people like Brian and I get along, even though he's clearly on the left, I'm clearly on the right. We don't talk about abortion necessarily, but on issues like war and peace, on issues like Assange, like press freedom, I think Brian and I are very, very much on the same page. Every time I've talked to him, and Brian just got back from Hanoi, where he did great coverage there for us as well. So
Brian, welcome to the vigil. We, of course, began with Chelsea Manning's story. That's what we've been talking about, even if we got sidetracked here on Fox News. Can you give us generally your take on what happened today, what Chelsea Manning's done, why you think she's done what she's done, and why she's in jail right now?
Well, yeah, I mean, hats off to Chelsea Manning as one of the, well, she's a truth teller, and the courage is, I mean, you can't beat her courage. I mean, here she is, 6 years in jail, treated horribly in jail. She gets the commutation from Obama. When she came out of jail, she wasn't even hesitant to criticize Obama. She could have easily just skipped that one, given what would be apparently a precarious position that she's in. I'm looking at her statement, at Chelsea's statement. I will not comply with this or any other grand jury imprisoning me for my refusal to answer questions only subjects me to additional punishment for my repeatedly stated ethical objections to the grand jury system. She also said earlier that she was standing in solidarity with other activists. And she also made the point that the grand jury actually has nothing to learn from her. Nothing. Everything that could be learned about what Chelsea Manning knows was learned 3 years in 2013. I mean, there was a exhaustive questioning at the court martial. All the documents are there. She went to prison for it. But what's remarkable, Joe, is this, that, you know, we hear a lot about journalists are being subjected to possible criminal penalties for not revealing their sources. But Chelsea Manning, in this case, is the source, and she's going to prison for not reporting on the journalist who covered the story that she released and which everybody knew about. I mean, it's so bizarre. It's so absurd on its face. But again, just hats off to Chelsea Manning in terms of standing up for what's right. You know, if everybody did what Chelsea Manning did today, the problems that we're all encountering would actually be taken care of, because the people who control the instruments of state coercion and repression, and in fact, the people who control the opinion molding that constitutes the dominant narrative in society, justifying the institutions of state repression, they're a tiny minority. We, the people, and I say that, you know, with full sense of what that means, we have the power if we're strong, if we're mobilized, if we decide to act like we have the power. And that's what Chelsea did. Chelsea acted like we, the people, should have the power to stand up and be ethical and be principled. And if everybody did what she did, we would win, because we are the majority, the vast majority. And the instruments of repression are really controlled by a very, very, very tiny elite. It's really about whether or not people stand up, whether they lose their fear and stand up. And that's why I think it's an inspiration what happened today, even though it's also a gross, terrible injustice.
But if we, the people, exercise our power, then we'd have a democracy. Can't have
Exactly.
that. Can't have that.
Yeah. I mean, like, there would be nothing more revolutionary than actually being a democratic place, because it would require almost revolution to exercise that democracy. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Now, I think it's interesting is that she cited her First, Fourth, and Sixth Amendment rights in refusing to speak to the grand jury. And the Sixth Amendment one really caught my attention, because that is the part of the Constitution that gives Americans the absolute right for a jury by trial and a public trial and a defense. Now, when she was questioned during her court martial, she had a defense. It was a trial. Where in this case, in a grand jury, she's being asked the same question she was asked under the conditions of the Sixth Amendment in a secret setting where there is no defense, where there is no public, where what is said in that room is absolute secrecy, cannot be repeated anywhere, even though stuff is often leaked from a grand jury. That is not supposed to be made public. So they appear to be trying to get her in a setting where she could be railroad into saying something or manipulated in a way that there's no light shown on how that was being done, and no defense attorney there to advise her. That's very troubling situation, which is, I think, the essence of why she refused to testify.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you know, because of where I come from in the progressive movement, I was an activist and an organizer since I've been 15 years old, and that was during the Vietnam War. And I was there, and my parents were in the civil rights movement. And, you know, all of us who are of this age know how the grand jury system was used to entrap and imprison hundreds of core organizers in the movement. I mean, hundreds, I'm not joking. And it was done over and over and over again. And at a certain point, people just decided they were going to stop cooperating with the grand jury system, as she has done. And that meant that you went to jail. Because if you didn't cooperate, if they grant you immunity and you don't cooperate, they hit you with contempt and they put you in jail for the duration of the grand jury. That's 18 months, but a grand jury can be renewed, and it's routinely renewed. So the 18 can be 36. It can go on. And again, no due process. You're just there. A judge has decided you're in contempt because you don't want to go along with the kangaroo court, or you don't want to name names. You know, once you're there, you can't like invoke the Fifth Amendment after you've answered some questions. You can't say, well, I'm going to selectively decide what to answer or not. So it's just like the HUAC hearings. It's just like the House of Un-American Activities Committee, the witch hunt, the Star Chamber, where if they ask you a question, Brian, do you know Lee Stranahan, for instance? And I decide, well, I don't want to talk about Lee Stranahan because it's not relevant to what's going on here. And they're just on a fishing expedition. I say, I don't want to talk about that. You're in contempt. You're in contempt. So it's not just a slippery slope. It's the road to hell. And again, all the power is lodged in the state. The grand jury was all of us as kids learned the grand jury was a way to sort of limit government power, to stop arbitrary arrest and detention. In fact, it's just the opposite.
Well, a more extreme example would be some of the generals in Latin America during the 70s and 80s when they would find a telephone book of someone and they would torture them to get information about other people. Throw them out of airplanes if you didn't want to cooperate with their investigation to widen their net of people they were bringing in. So that's what you're saying, basically. They're using intimidation to try to get you to rat on other people and throw you in jail if you don't. This is put in those terms, most Americans would be very shocked and upset by this. But instead, there's this respect for the law and the authority of the law and the grand jury system. And again, we have the press taking indictments and reporting them as if they're convictions. For example, the GRU agents, the whole thing. So the same thing as Julian is now going to be convicted if he's indicted. That's what I think. The press will just convict him.
Yeah, and from the point of view of the media narrative, an indictment is conviction. I mean, you look at it, you look at all the media. I mean, look at the Robert Mueller investigation, for instance. You know, every time they want to fortify the assertion, which is unproved as of yet, that there was collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia in 2016, when you talk to people, and I talk to people I know, even people who should actually seriously know better, and they'll say, well, what are you talking about? Mueller's got, XYZ number of indictments. He also, by the way, what is it? Concord, which is fighting the indictment, and they weren't supposed to come to court. They were supposed to just never show up so that the media could say, they're indicted. When now I think as Mueller's holding back, what is it, 250,000 documents or something, some huge number. And it appears that the indicted party, the indicted entity, by requesting documents which prove the foundational evidence for their indictment, that in and of itself is like an attack on the American judicial system. The fact that you're trying to defend yourself. I mean, that's where we are right now. And that's how the indicted entities are treated. They're guilty. They've been convicted by the media. And should they dare to fight back, they're throwing a wrench into the great machinery of the democratic judicial process. I mean, it's a criminal injustice system designed for that reason. We have 2.4 million people in jail. 95% of them never went to trial. 98% of those who did dare to go to trial are convicted, and they're punished with additional sentencing if they go. So there's nothing just about this justice system. And right now, Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange are caught up in it. And we have to really seriously expose this system for what it is so that the media doesn't get away with the presentation. If you're indicted, that means you're guilty. If you're indicted, that means there must be enough smoke that there's absolutely got to be a fire in there somewhere. And why would some esteemed individuals like Robert Mueller do something that would be egregiously unjust? And because, of course, he too is presented in the media as if he's like the knight on a white horse, riding in to save our democracy. Everything has been tipped upside down. But the fact of the matter is, we have people like Chelsea, we have people like Julian Assange, we have a lot of other people who are truth tellers. And what one person does actually makes a difference, not only because of the actual product, in the case of WikiLeaks, the information that's received by all of us, but because other people are inspired by the example of individual heroes. And bravery is contagious, and so is fear. And that's why we have to hold up the people who are brave enough to stand up, so that what they do is actually an inspiration for others to take action.
It's journalism 101 that I learned when I was an undergraduate, that you use the word alleged before someone's name or a crime if it hasn't been proven and there hasn't been a conviction. If there's only an indictment, that person is alleged. And you'll still see that in a garden variety crime. A murderer, a mugger, a rapist will still be seen as an alleged criminal until he or she is convicted. But that is dispensed with in these political trials. And when it comes to WikiLeaks, when it comes to Assange, when it comes to the whole Russiagate saga, the GRU agents, it's not an alleged crime. We see bold statements at NPR, CNN, New York Times that Russia hacked the computers. Well, maybe Russia did, but that has to be proven in a court. And of course, Robert Mueller's team knew that those GR agents will never appear in a courtroom. Therefore, they could say whatever the hell they want because it's never going to be proven. And in this case, we might see Julian Assange in a courtroom. We might not, but we're going to, I think, see again that he's guilty of having been the agent of Russia. And that is not at all proven. We don't even know if that's in the indictment, because this indictment has nothing to do, again, with the Russiagate saga, the thing that Chelsea Manning is being asked to testify about. It has to do with the 2010 collateral murder video. It's really that conflation that they're making is quite another bit of deception being practiced by the press that the government is quite happy with, I think.
I want to say one other point about that too, if I could, which is, when that videotape was released by WikiLeaks, it made such a big difference. I talked even to one of the soldiers involved in that incident. It was transformative at the time that it happened. The cold-blooded murder of the Reuters journalist and other journalists and a whole bunch of civilians. And then the kids who were shot in the car. I mean, that was such an impactful video. And all the media used it. You remember, it was on nightly news. It was nightly news. So WikiLeaks releases documents from Chelsea Manning. Chelsea Manning goes to prison, serves 6 years in prison. Julian Assange goes into another kind of prison, arbitrary detention in the Ecuadorian embassy. The same media that treat it as a legitimate news item and highlight it and focus on it during those, for months actually, they say absolutely nothing about in defense of Julian Assange or Chelsea Manning. Nothing. They don't lift a finger. So if it was such a criminal act that we got to see this war crimes video, if the act of the release of the document was so awful, why aren't these media considered culpable too? But if you were to say, hey, the New York Times or CNN or NBC, by presenting this video, were part of a criminal enterprise, people would say, no, don't you know what the First Amendment says? Don't you know that the First Amendment is designed to protect the press not only the press, but partly the press against government overreach when the press does something that the government doesn't like? But why does the First Amendment only apply to corporate-owned mainstream media and not Julian Assange and not WikiLeaks? I mean, this is an obvious double standard that I think we also have to hit away at.
Can I mention one thing, Joe, too? Just to amplify some of the things that Brian's saying. The other thing you have to realize here is, aside from the legal consequences, there are psychological consequences to these prosecutions. And the people who are prosecuting this absolutely know that. There's two psychological effects. One in the public, it is a chilling effect. When you send the SWAT team into Roger Stone's house, for instance, people notice that. And it creates a chilling effect where they don't want to speak up. But on the people themselves, and it's easy to blame, it's easy to go, well, Roger Stone did something stupid with that Instagram post about the judge, which I agree with. But I'm going to point out that I give a lot of credit to people who don't do stupid stuff under the pressure of indictment. We had Brian's co-host on his show Loud and Clear on Sputnik is John Kiriakou, who is on a lot of these Unity for J calls. And I asked John once when he was on the radio with me, I just, on a personal basis, John, I said, what happened when you were indicted? What happened to the people who knew you? And he said, you learn who your friends are. He said, it sounds like a cliche, but you really do. Most people run away. They don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. And they know that. The people doing these prosecutions absolutely know the psychological effects that this has on the people that they're prosecuting. And I don't think you can underestimate them, because that kind of pressure, people do stupid stuff. I'm not excusing it. I'm saying, let's talk about the system here and not just the failings of, like I say, Roger Stone does something stupid. Yes, he's responsible ultimately and blah, blah, blah. But it's not an accident that this is going on. I think the psychological effects are a big part of the game that's being played here.
How did CNN know to have a camera crew right outside Roger Stone's house when the SWAT team busted in? I mean, they said it was just a coincidence. They had a sense something was coming at 6 a.m. Amazingly perspicacious, and so like big corporate news crews to go position camera crews without knowledge beforehand that something like that was going to happen. And again, I'm no fan of Roger Stone, that's putting it mildly, or Donald Trump. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at what's going on and the way the elites, Republican and Democratic Party, who have a lockhold over the instruments of coercion, are using those instruments of coercion against people who decide that they want to expose the truth that hurts the system that the elites benefit from. Whether you're conservative or leftist, I mean, you need to recognize the danger at hand. I mean, it's real. It's real.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel I want to ask either one of you, Lee or Brian, what do you think will happen moving forward? I know Joe and I were discussing earlier the fact that Brian brought up, which is that these indictment processes can be renewed, that Chelsea Manning, at the moment looks like she could be in prison for up to 18 months, but that could go on and on and on. It seems that this grand jury has been, renewed since probably 2010. So do you think there's a possibility that she could be in prison potentially for a much longer period than just, a few months?
Well, can I answer first, Brian?
Yeah.
So I think the thing that's important here is the indie media types, which we all kind of qualify at. We need to get our act together in the way the corporate media does. Let me explain. When they were going to do the government shutdown, CNN started doing it was after the shutdown happened, the clock, right? Which is on CNN on a constant basis. We're 4 days into the government shutdown. We're 6 days, whatever. the indie media, and I say this, I'm not trying to tell anybody their business. I'm saying I need to remember this as a person who hosts a radio show. I have to remember to not stop talking about Chelsea Manning. It's going to be the easiest thing in the world to forget about Chelsea. We're talking about it now. We'll talk about it next week. Well, it gets tricky about 6 weeks in when all the other news stories and people need to make, I'll put it like this, it's like an exercise program or something like that. If you kind of leave it to willpower, you're doomed, right? But if we can, so I need to call my producer and say, we need to have a reminder every Thursday, put it in the calendar, we're doing Chelsea Manning Thursday. And the specifics of how we do it will be different. But I know for a fact, if I don't do that, and you don't do that in some form, and everybody doesn't do that, the story is going to fall off. The only thing that keeps us going is when it's week 8 or week 10, is that Chelsea Manning still has support, people telling the story every week.
Well, and that's exactly the type of thinking that did, create this vigil for Julian Assange. And after he was gagged, that's the exact kind of motivation we all had as well, was to keep talking about it after the news cycle had moved on. So I completely agree with what you're saying, Lee. Brian, did you have anything you wanted to add about the possibility that Chelsea Manning could be in prison for, almost an indefinite period of time?
Sadly, I think that's true. The grand juries go on and on. I mean, there's lots of examples of it that people forget about. At the beginning of the Clinton administration in '93, right beforehand, the Whitewater investigation began in earnest. And that grand jury was renewed over and over again. Friends of the Clintons who refused to cooperate, and they said it was a vast right-wing conspiracy, they stayed in jail for multiple 18-month cycles of grand juries. So yes, I mean, there's lots of precedent for this. And again, it's, we put the people running grand juries on a pedestal. And that's kind of what you were saying, is that there's an assumption that because they're in charge of the grand jury, that they're somehow like they're beyond questioning in terms of what their motives and tactics are. That it's justice itself incarnated in these people, when in fact the grand jury is just it's a tool of sort of limitless power over individuals, and it's used by people who know that they themselves will pay no price. They don't have to prove anything. But if you resist, you can be incarcerated for up to 18 months, and then it will be renewed. I think it's very likely it will be renewed until they've succeeded in the real function of the grand jury, which is to arrest Julian Assange. It's not going to stop, and that's the reality. So, again, hats off to Chelsea Manning for extraordinary bravery. I mean, really. I mean, we have to think. Here we are. We're all on a vigil right now. We're taking some number of minutes or hours to do something that's good. At this very moment, we have Julian Assange basically incarcerated in the Ecuadorian embassy, and now Chelsea Manning imprisoned for what might be a considerable length of time. And these folks are enduring a lot of hardship, and they're doing it because they are truth tellers and because they are brave souls. And I really, in addition to having an objective faculty about what's going on and analyzing and assessing on an emotional level, on a human level, I just think it's hard to overstate the debt all of us have to these very, very strong, courageous people.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that's a great point, a really fantastic point, that, we're committing, a few hours or minutes to this vigil, and yet we're free, and we are not being, we're not experiencing what Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange are experiencing right now. I think it's hard to overstate the importance of that point, for sure. Definitely. I think I just received a statement from James Cogan of the Socialist Equality Party of Australia, and Brian and Lee, if you want to stick around until after that statement, I'd really appreciate it. But I wanted to read that before the vigil ended because James has previously participated in the Unity 4J vigils, but he was unable to today because of travel and related complications. But he sent us this statement. He said, quote, "The Trump administration's imprisonment of Chelsea Manning for refusing to give false testimony against WikiLeaks and Julian Assange is an outrage. She has suffered more than enough for her courage and service to the truth. American democracy rolls in the gutter and is rapidly descending into the sewer of dictatorship. The working class everywhere must come to Chelsea's defense and take up the demand for immediate release of Assange and all persecuted class war prisoners. The SEP in Australia will be redoubling our effort to secure Julian's immediate return to his country with full protection, and we will be joining all international action to fight the immediate restoration of Chelsea Manning's freedom." And that is, again, from James Cogan of the Socialist Equality Party, and he is the Social Equality Party National Secretary, and that was obviously sent to us today on March 9th, 2019. So, Brian, do you, from your experience watching your parents in the civil rights movement, Vietnam, and having that unique kind of perspective on these grand juries and indictments, what can be done to educate the public on the reality of them that we've been discussing in this vigil? Because as far as I'm concerned, the public really doesn't really differentiate between them and normal, judicial procedure. What can be done to educate the public on the difference?
Yeah, that's a really big task, and the only way to do it is with the facts. And we have to maybe some number of people who have the capacity and the knowledge and the time, the availability, need to put together some core talking points and fact sheets that everybody can use in different ways, either in person, at meetings, at demonstrations. By the way, we're having this big protest on Saturday, March 16th here in Washington to protest the coup attempt against the democratically elected government of Venezuela. We intend to talk about the grand jury and talk about Chelsea and talk about Julian Assange from the stage of that demonstration. But aside from big gatherings like that, each and every one of us, we go to a community meeting, or we're in school, or we go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque. We're somewhere where people are. We are social creatures. Having talking points and being willing to sort of do the socially awkward thing of intervening in the normal lives of people and say, look, here's some information that's critically important about how the grand jury is being abused in the case of Julian Assange or in the case of Chelsea Manning. Doing those things, each and every one of us can do those things. And then, of course, because we're all, well, not all, but many of us are also on social media, if we're able to take these kind of talking points, if it's succinct, if it's centralized, if it's persuasively presented, we should share it a lot. That's the thing about modern technology and what we're doing is, even if we're small in number, and movements are always built by some very tiny minorities, especially at first, but our capacity to reach, our capacity to speak, our expansive ability to reach people is different now because of social media, and we can use these tools to do that. But again, we need some level of minimum organization to get that kind of document out, and then a commitment from each and every one of us that we all reinforce with each other that we actually go ahead and do it.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, sorry about Elizabeth. I was just going to say, and that's where a guy like Brian, who has literally decades of organizing experience, is so valuable in terms of just the basic blocking and tackling of organizing that, frankly, a lot of people, and by the way, this is especially true on the right. I've worked, like I said, I've been on both the center left and center right. I used to do work for Move On when I wrote for Huffington Post and that kind of thing. But the right is notoriously bad at it. And so if you have people who are concerned about this on the right, the libertarians, or a lot of, like I say, you'd be surprised. The establishment narrative is falling apart in front of their people's eyes. This thing in Venezuela, you don't have a lot of Trump supporters out there blindly going along with it. Yes, they like chanting USA, and if they bring up socialism, boo, and they do that whole thing. But at the end of the day, Trump supporters don't really support regime change. One of the reasons they liked Trump, a lot of Trump supporters, is because he was like, let's stop nation building, but they're very bad at organizing. And so that's why, like I say, the stuff you guys are doing, continuing, Joe, to keep these vigils going, you and Susie and Elizabeth, the great work you do, and the institutional knowledge in organizing that a guy like Brian has with the stuff he's done with big events, so important at this point. People are looking, I think most people right now, they know they can't trust the mainstream media. They're starting to realize they can't even trust the second, you can't trust if you're on the left, you don't trust HuffPost anymore. A lot of Breitbart readers, and I've worked at both of those, don't trust Breitbart anymore. You can see it in the comments. The problem is, where do they go? Where do they go to? And you don't want them to go to the more fringe, crazy, QAnon elements or whatever, because that's nuts. And but if we give them someplace better to go, I think if we build it, they will come. To not make up an old Kevin Costner movie analogy, but I think that's a big part of the work that needs to be done. Keep things steadily going, and like Brian says, use social situations, not just social media, to talk about these things and not get sucked into the BS narrative on the establishment left or the establishment right.
Yeah, no, I think it's incredibly important to take note of that point, which is that when we, kind of have that, when we face that social discomfort of bringing up these types of topics that we know might be awkward or that maybe people don't want to hear, it's a fraction of the discomfort that we've been discussing that Chelsea Manning and, Julian Assange are going through. And I think that's the very least that we can collectively do is kind of bridge that gap and volunteer ourselves even through that discomfort to bring these topics up to people that we know are open-minded generally, but who maybe really don't know about this or don't know the real story because they've been listening to the Maddow's and the CNNs and the Fox Newses. For sure. Yeah. Brian, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I agree with you. I mean, we're sort of reinforcing the same message, but that's the thing about messages, that to be impactful, there has to be reinforcement. There has to be redundancy. We're each and every one of us, each and every human being is, our senses are bombarded with all kinds of things, from media, from pressures in life, from family. I mean, we're social creatures. We're under a lot of different pressures. And for something to stand out, for something to become like a big thing, it has to be reinforced. And it has to be reinforced in a positive way over and over and over again. And so even though we are, in a way, saying the same thing, maybe in slightly different ways, it's worth saying it over and over again, because we need people to start acting. And, action, that's the other thing, is once people start acting, and I'm glad you picked up on the earlier point about when if you feel socially awkward about doing something, your tendency is to draw back, right? Like the first time when we have new volunteers in the Answer Coalition, we have them go out on the street and they are handing out flyers to please come to the demonstration in Venezuela, Saturday, March 16th. The first time they go out, most people are feeling like, oh my God, I'm handing out pieces of paper to strangers who don't necessarily want these pieces of paper. And it's intimidating to them. It's embarrassing. But after you do it and you start to get some positive feedback, you think like, hey, that was great. I really did something new, something that was outside my comfort zone, so to speak, to use a ridiculous cliche. But people start to do it, and they change. They become activists, and they start to lose their fear of being socially awkward. And the funny thing about it is everybody else is feeling the same things. And when they see somebody actually stepping out and doing something and not being crucified for it, or in fact having a positive impact, that too opens their door, their thought processes about what they can do. And that's the whole thing about activism and efficiency, is convincing people that they can actually make a difference. If you don't think you can make a difference, you generally retreat into your personal life or seek individual salvation in this, that, or the other thing. But if people feel that they can make a difference, and there's lots of people who are at the same time feeling like they can make a difference, then that's the thing that actually makes a movement grow. There has to be a degree of hope and idealism and the sense that what we do makes a difference for people to take the time to do these kind of things. So again, I mean, it's a reinforced message, but that's the message of this vigil, isn't it? That's the message, is that you guys are doing this every Friday. I'm able to join some Fridays. Last week, I was in Hanoi covering the Trump Kim Jong-un summit. So obviously I'm not going to be available. Maybe next week, the night before the demonstration, I might not be available. But the fact that you're doing this and it's routine and it's constant means that people know it's here. And that also means that other people can join in. So I think we're doing the right thing. Maybe we can find a way to produce even more materials like the talking points on the grand jury. Right. That's critically important right now, because the grand jury is this, again, we have to demystify the grand jury, and we have to take it off the pedestal as if it's some crowning jewel in a criminal justice system, and to find a way to expose it for what it really is.
Well,
I couldn't agree more. Go ahead, Joe.
I'd like to get back in here. I don't know how long I was gone. I wanted to read from the Charlie Savage piece this morning about what happened with Chelsea Manning. I think it's really interesting to see how they've covered this. The New York Times writes that during her court-martial in 2013, Ms. Manning had admitted sending WikiLeaks large archives of secret documents. Her bulk disclosure vaulted the group and Mr. Assange to global fame years before we gained a different notoriety for publishing stolen Democratic emails that Russian hackers had stolen during the 2016 presidential campaign. This is another example of where they could easily have put in that Russian hackers allegedly had stolen during the 2016 campaign. The word allegedly is gone. So the New York Times has convicted the Russians in the pages of their newspaper, not in a courtroom. And then it goes on to say, in a lengthy confession in 2013, Ms. Manning said that she had interacted online with someone who was likely Mr. Assange. Does anybody know anything about that? Is there any evidence that she spoke?
I was reading about that earlier today, and I don't remember which article it was exactly, but it seemed to be that there was an account that was used, but it was labeled, basically WikiLeaks, and that it was never identified specifically as Julian Assange. The assumption is that at some point, possibly, it was Julian Assange directly communicating, but that was never really established in her original court-martial proceeding, from what I read.
Yeah. Okay, it goes on to say, but she, Manning, said that she acted of her own accord and was not directed by anyone at WikiLeaks. That's what she said in her lengthy confession in 2013. Ms. Manning said prosecutors had wanted her to go over those same events. That's in the grand jury. Quote from a statement from Manning: the grand jury's questions pertain to disclosures from 9 years ago and took place 6 years after an in-depth computer forensic case in which I testified for almost a full day about these events. I stand by my previous testimony. I will not participate in a secret process that I morally object to, particularly one that has been historically used to entrap and persecute activists for protected political speech. That's exactly what Brian was talking about, that grand jury has been used historically to entrap and persecute activists for protected political speech. So it's clear that they want her to go over the same material and say something she didn't say the first time in an in a venue in which the Sixth Amendment rights are not applied. And I think that's the essence of what she's doing here. And she could stay in jail for a very long time, as we've heard, in order to prevent her from being manipulated or tricked into saying something.
Yeah, well, I think the point Brian was making earlier about the bravery of Chelsea Manning here, it's a vital point that can't be overstated or said too much, especially since she no longer has the voice to speak for herself. And it's always weird to say, look how brave I am. So no one wants to do that anyway. But since she doesn't have a voice right now, it is very important simply to point out that, look, as I said before, how easy would it have been for Chelsea Manning to simply go into this grand jury, right, and kind of just plead the fifth on some stuff or whatever. The non-cooperation here, Brian hit on this earlier, the non-cooperation is a big deal. And there needs to be more of it. There needs to be more people saying, look, this is a farce. I'm not going to be involved in a farce. I'm not going to be involved in you don't need to stay. Hunter Thompson said something, I always get the quote wrong, but you don't need to stay on an uneven playing field. It is completely sporting to, when you realize the game is rigged, to say, I'm out. And for Chelsea to do that, and again, I'm one of those people who, some of the stuff in the Chelsea Manning case, I was critical of at the time. And now I'm at a position where whatever I think about that, that's completely irrelevant to what's going on now. That's been adjudicated, that's been handled. And at this point, all that is going on is whatever anyone thinks of Chelsea Manning for 100 reasons, personal bias or political bias, whether you thought she was a hero as Bradley Manning, whether you thought that, doesn't make any difference. Right now, today, in the atmosphere we're in, she should be a hero to anybody who cares about the First Amendment. And sadly, there are fewer and fewer people, particularly in the media, who care about the First Amendment. They just pay lip service to it. Compare Chelsea Manning to Jim Acosta, let's say, where CNN was freaking out because he lost his press pass. It's not even close. There's no similarity between Jim Acosta losing his press pass at the White House for a couple of days and Chelsea Manning basically volunteering. I mean, she doesn't want to go, but she knew what she was in for. She walked in knowing she would likely not be walking out. And that is the most heroic thing I can think of.
Right. We want to welcome in George Samueli. George, can you hear us? You're a red screen right now.
Yeah, so I see the red screen. I see you, but
we've got. Have you covered your webcam with anything? Or?
No, I don't think so.
Interesting. I've never seen this particular issue before.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anyway, George, I think that color might fit with your politics, so carry on.
Yeah, maybe. Well,
there you go.
So I wonder whether somebody can answer some questions that I'm not entirely clear about. I mean, all the papers are writing that Chelsea Manning was offered immunity, and that means she cannot plead the Fifth Amendment. She has to testify before the grand jury. Is that true? I mean, is that the case, that the prosecutor can just simply offer you a fifth immunity, even though you haven't asked for it, and in return you are then obligated to testify about anything that the prosecutor wants to know about? I mean, is that really the case?
Well, I don't know whether immunity is necessary. They sent her a subpoena. And by law, you have to answer a subpoena. You have to come and testify.
But they didn't give her the option of pleading the Fifth, because she could have come along and said, well, I plead the Fifth Amendment. But they're saying, no, she can't plead the Fifth Amendment because she has already been offered immunity. Right.
Yes. So I guess the immunity offer was to eliminate the Fifth Amendment. But she did the equivalent of the Fifth Amendment by giving the same answers to every question, which it violates her First, Fourth, and Sixth Amendments.
Yes.
So she didn't need the Fifth Amendment. That's why she didn't mention the Fifth Amendment, because that wasn't available to her. But the First Amendment being that she had the right to free speech.
Yes.
Fourth Amendment, I'm not quite sure how that applies, because the Fourth Amendment, of course, is about the protection of Americans from illegal search and seizures.
Right.
I don't know how that applies. That's an interesting one. But the Sixth Amendment is clear, and I've been twice pointed that out here, that she has a right under the Sixth Amendment, as every American does. Oh, we see George now.
Yeah, that's it. Yes.
Actually, you look better in red, but anyway.
I think so too.
The Sixth Amendment gives every American the absolute right to a public trial by jury and a defense, which is not present in a grand jury. So while she was asked those things in her court-martial with a defense team there, she was going to be asked the same questions without a defense team, without legal advice. That is completely, in this case where they're trying to get her to rat out something on Assange, she refused to do that. So
Right.
that's the
But
answer to that.
this is even more serious, because what we've had in the past is journalists being hauled in before the grand jury in order to find out about their sources. This time, they're hauling in a source in order to have the source rat out a journalist. So this is clearly a case of persecuting a journalist. So this is obviously a First Amendment issue. So
Right.
This isn't like, oh, we're conducting a criminal investigation because we want to find out who illegally stole some information. This is, they're going after this person precisely because they want to get the journalist. So this is clearly a violation of the First Amendment.
Right, and it seems to be accepted by the guardians of the First Amendment, like the New York Times, etc. This has just become normal, what they've done. There doesn't seem to be any outcry about this.
Yes.
John Kuriako is now joined us as well, so we're going to have a nice little discussion here. John, welcome to the Vigil. Really happy to see you because you are experienced in these matters. Of course, we've been talking almost exclusively about Chelsea Manning this morning, about her First, Fourth, and Sixth Amendment right that she declared made her, and she felt they were being violated, and that's why she wanted to answer questions. Just give us your overall take on what happened today.
Well, the first thing that I thought when I heard this news, well, I thought two things. Number one, this was an incredibly courageous thing that she did. You can like Chelsea or dislike her or like her politics or not, but you would have to agree that this was incredibly courageous. She could have done two other things. She could have ratted out whoever it was they wanted her to rat out, probably Julian. She didn't do that. She also could have just gone in there and she could have taken the Fifth, and she didn't do that. She did what Pete Seeger did in the late 1950s when he was hauled before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and he took the First rather than the Fifth. She took the First, the Fourth, and the Sixth, I think. That was a courageous thing in the 1950s, and he ended up being convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison. He never actually served those 2 years because the conviction was overturned on appeal. But this is not a decision that one takes lightly. Remember that Chelsea has already been in prison for 7 years. 2 of those years were in solitary confinement. I know the PTSD that she must be suffering from. I know how much in her gut she probably hated the idea of being locked up in a cage again. But she did it on principle. And that, to me, is a toughness that is rarely seen. I have great admiration for her today.
No doubt about that. Please jump in. Feel free to jump in.
So,
John, yeah, go on, George, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, do you have a sense of how the appeal would go? I mean, does anyone have a sense of that? How strong, how likely is she likely to prevail on those First, Fourth, and Sixth Amendment grounds? Is it likely to be successful?
I spoke to a couple of different attorneys today, including one who's a constitutional scholar, and they seem to be in agreement that the law is clear, and the case law is clear, that she'll likely lose on appeal. But I don't think she cares. I don't think she expected to win, either at the district level or even on appeal. at the circuit level. I think she did it to prove a point, and it is a point that very few Americans would have the guts to take by the horns like she did. I was shocked by it. I just assumed she would go in there and take the fifth when pushed to make a decision, and she didn't. She did the hard
They
way.
eliminated the fifth. We were talking about that just before you joined us. By giving her immunity, they eliminated
Right.
the fifth. So she chose
Right.
the first, fourth, and sixth. John, given your background, can you give us some insight into why she cited the Fourth Amendment, of course, which is against illegal search and seizure? How does that apply here?
You know, my guess is, Joe, that because she essentially answered all of the questions that she thought the prosecution would ask ask her in front of the grand jury anyway in her own trial in 2012 and 13. Really, all the prosecutors needed to do was to submit the transcript of that hearing into the record. And then the same information's in there. It's as good as it is if she sits in front of them and just repeats it all. So I think that she's arguing that because the information is already in the public record as part of that trial, it is illegal for them to force her to go back through the whole thing all over again.
Based on the Fourth Amendment.
I think it's a pissing match is what it is.
So based on the Fourth Amendment, would it be illegal for them to go over the previously
I don't know.
testimony?
I'm not an attorney. It's all I could come up with today as I was poring over this. But I think her argument is, look, this is harassment. The information's already out there. I've already answered these questions. I'm not going to play games with you.
So let's speculate. Why would they want to go over that same material again if they didn't want her to say something different, right?
You know, I think it's because, and I know prosecutors, man, I'll tell you from firsthand experience, I know these guys, they're monsters. I think probably a lot of them are still furious that her 35 years were commuted to 7. I think that they saw an opportunity to get her in trouble again, at the very least, by having her contradict herself. And then even though she has immunity, at least they can try to discredit her by saying, hey, she said A in 2015 or 2013, she said B in 2019. She's not reliable. And then she called them on it.
How could they do that if it's a secret grand jury? How could they call her out and say she's something different in the grand jury?
Well, because eventually that grand jury information is going to be given in discovery to both the defense. And even though the grand jury itself is a secret body, the information always comes out. Certainly mine did. I know exactly what people said about me in the grand jury. I saw the transcripts.
Yeah. So they were going to try to trip her up or manipulate her into saying something that could incriminate Assange. That's what it seems like.
Exactly it. That is exactly it. Yes. And like I say, she called them on it.
In a setting where she doesn't have any counsel, where she's not allowed to have defense to help her through this.
Mm-hmm. You are on your own in the grand jury. And like I say, if you contradict yourself, then who knows what can end up happening to you. They offered her immunity. If she hadn't had immunity, they could charge her with making a false statement or with perjury, or even with immunity. As I said a second ago, they could at least argue that she was inconsistent and try to discredit her, and she wouldn't allow them to do that.
This also tells us two things, this whole story. One, that they're dead serious about getting Assange. And two, that this indictment is not over. It may be sealed, but they're still adding to it. So that could be one way encouraging, that they don't maybe feel they have enough yet
to
get him, so that they needed her. So she, by not testifying now, she's preventing them from furthering this indictment, which is a great thing she's doing, right?
I think that's exactly right, Joe. And I'll tell you why. I was arrested 4 months before I was indicted. They arrested me because they wanted to make a political point in the press. They didn't have enough to hold me. So I was only locked up for 2 hours. And then they started their investigation. So I was arrested in January. They didn't even impanel a grand jury until April. And then finally in April, they lodged these formal charges. So I think the same thing is happening here. I think they've been doing this investigation forever. And they realize now that push has come to shove, they really don't have very much information against Julian. And so they're going to try, by impaneling this grand jury, to dig up something that they can hang on him, or something extra that they can hang on him that they can then bargain away later.
All they've got is the Espionage Act, which they could use to say that Assange illegally possessed classified information, that he was not an authorized person to have it. But they don't want to go down that road, because that opens up the New York Times problem, which is that the Times, so they want to get something else. It looks like, from what we're seeing today, they don't have that something else. And they were hoping to get it from Chelsea Manning. And she's giving a big middle finger.
I agree 100%. I think that's exactly what we saw today.
Well, the other thing too, the broader thing is, this is the same. So let's leave aside Chelsea for just a second. What about what's going on with Assange? What about this entire grand jury process? This is the process that, remember, was supposedly, there was like a mistake in paperwork. So this was just a few months ago that we knew this has been going on. But I got to say that this grand jury process, there have been very few leaks. So just the fact that Assange is being gone after, just that alone, even if Chelsea, whatever happened with Chelsea, one of the things she's done by being open about this, don't forget, she talked about when she got subpoenaed. She came out very publicly and said, I've been subpoenaed about this. But even this whole process against Assange has been going on in secret. That alone should frighten people. For, like I said, the Chelsea thing makes it worse. But just the fact that this secret process has been going on against Assange, why exactly? And what else is it connected to? And why is no one in the media covering, and why is it not, as we mentioned before, they had no problem, the mainstream media had no problem using material from WikiLeaks when it served whatever they saw as their political purpose, attacking a Republican at the time or whatever it was about. Whatever, they used it then, but now they've vanished completely, not just on Chelsea, but on Julian for months and months and months and months. The media has been ignoring what's happening to Julian Assange. That is, to me, is just as disturbing as this. It's related directly, but it's just as disturbing.
And the way that the media have fueled the absolutely ridiculous, bogus story that WikiLeaks was working with the Russians, that WikiLeaks is somehow an arm of the Russian government. And this has been repeated ad nauseum. I mean, the people come on TV, they come on MSNBC, and they keep repeating this until, if you look at, let's say, the comment section to, I think, that Charlie Savage article that Joe was talking about, just read the comment section. And how many of those readers all repeat the same thing? Oh, well, maybe some time ago WikiLeaks was great, but now it's working with the Russians. And it's based on absolutely nothing. It's a completely bogus nonsense, and yet it's just repeated, and so people just accept it. Yeah. Julian Assange is working with the Kremlin.
I wonder how many of those commenters think that this Manning issue and that this testimony has to do with the 2016 presidential election, which it has zero to do.
Zero, yeah. No, that's very true. But that was sort of something that, I mean, you've published that article by Caitlin about Rachel Maddow, who actually put out that as if this is all to do with the 2016 election.
Rachel Maddow purposely conflated those two in her show on Tuesday night, as Caitlin pointed out. And this is, look, we know that Assange has been charged. That's what that paragraph, one of those two paragraphs that were inadvertently made public says. He has been charged. We don't know what he has been charged with, but they're looking for more. Otherwise, they wouldn't have brought Chelsea in there to try to pin something else on him. I suspect that they don't want to go after him on the Espionage Act, and they want to get him for having encouraged Chelsea Manning to steal something so that he participated in the theft of government property. But as I said earlier in the show, Bob Perry, of course, the founder of Consortium News, wrote a piece some years ago saying that he, as an investigative journalist, often encouraged his sources to give him more. This is part of the process. So even that would be hard to say, look, he was telling her to commit a crime. He was asking her to give, maybe if in fact he was, if they even communicated at all, asking her to give some more information. Is that encouraging a crime? I mean, they're on very shaky ground here, but the political atmosphere we're in gives them enormous support, even if it's bogus. That this has to do with the 2016 election, that Assange was involved in stealing classified information with Manning. The woman was convicted already and served time. This should be the end of the story, right, John? You're muted. You're muted. John, you're muted. Unmute yourself, please.
I'm trying to unmute him, but it won't let me. Oh, there, 1 second. It's on. There we go.
Sorry, it wouldn't respond.
Yeah, it didn't respond to my attempts either for a second.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. You know, and I'm wondering too what Julian's people are thinking about this. This has to be good news for them. It has to be heartening that that here we are now with people engaged in grand jury testimony, and people like Chelsea, who's probably integral to this case, are standing up for him. I think today's a good day, a very good day.
Well, WikiLeaks just an hour ago tweeted, interesting fact, a 5'2", 31-year-old transgender person, Chelsea Manning, appears to have been braver and more loyal to principle than every known Trump associate is to Trump. Why is that? Numerous others have left the U.S. permanently for Europe rather than testify against WikiLeaks. And now they also quoting Dan Ellsberg, who we've invited to join us. I don't know if he can. That it says WikiLeaks tweeted this 2 hours ago. Read what famed Pentagon Papers whistleblower Dan Ellsberg has to say on whistleblower Chelsea Manning being sent back to jail for refusing to be coerced into secretly testifying against Julian Assange. And this is the statement from Dan Ellsberg. Quote, Chelsea Manning is again acting heroically in the name of press freedom, and it's a travesty that she has been sent back to jail excuse me, for refusing to testify to a grand jury. An investigation into WikiLeaks for publishing is a grave threat to all journalists' rights.
Yeah.
Chelsea is doing us all a service for fighting it. She has already been tortured, spent years in jail, and has suffered more than enough. She should be released immediately. That's from Dan Ellsberg, the famed Pentagon whistleblower, and WikiLeaks is indeed trumpeting what Chelsea has done. And of course, WikiLeaks did a lot to protect her at the time, and they're coming forward again to do that. And they recognize that they've also tweeted the collateral murder video, which I think we have lined up, which we might want to show at some point, as horrifying and disturbing as it is. This is why she went to jail, why John Kiriakou went to jail for exposing crimes, and the criminals went free, and the people who exposed the crimes were imprisoned. And that is all you need to know about the political atmosphere we're living in.
And one of those readers' comments to that Charlie Savage article was a kind of rhetorical question. Well, what war crimes did WikiLeaks expose? And because that's all been forgotten. That the collateral murder video just been forgotten. All they know is, oh, well, Hillary Clinton in 2016. So all of that work that WikiLeaks, what war crimes did WikiLeaks expose?
Well, I'd like to answer that question. If we can get our tech people to line up the collateral murder video, then that question can be answered. What war crimes did Chelsea Manning expose? Well, we could just show it.
And while we get that lined up, I'd just like to add something that we haven't brought up so far in this vigil, and it relates directly to the events with Chelsea Manning. If I remember correctly, one of the events that led
more that keep walking by, and one of them has a weapon.
Roger, received, target 15.
Okay.
208.
See all those people standing down there?
Stand by. Roger. Stay firm. And open the courtyard.
Yeah, Roger. I just estimated there's about 20 of them.
There's one, yeah. Oh, yeah. Correct. Bandage 14, route 336.
I don't know if that's...
Hey, Bushmaster Element, copy at White 6. That's a weapon.
Yeah. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18.
We'll call for exchange by Charlie Mike Bravo. Speed 37. I'm Red White 6, Bushmaster 6 Romeo. Roger. Fucking break.
Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18. Have individuals with weapons.
4 radio. Radio Bandage 14, route.
Yep, he's got a weapon too. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18. Have 5 to 6 individuals with AK-47s. Request permission to engage.
Roger that. We have no personnel east of our position, so you are free to engage over.
All right, we'll be engaging.
Roger, go ahead. I can't get them now because they're behind that building.
Any Bushmaster Element, call by
We got
White
an
6.
RPG.
All right, we got a guy with an RPG.
I'm gonna fire. Okay.
No, hold on, let's come around.
Behind buildings right now from our point of view.
Yeah, we're gonna come around and
Hotel
get
26
them from
has an unarmed individual with RPG. Getting ready to fire. We won't.
Yeah, we got a guy shooting. Now he's behind the building.
God damn it.
Speed coming around.
Negative. He was right in front of the Brad. About there 1 o'clock. Haven't seen anything since then.
Just fucking, once you get on him, just open them up.
Again, Roger. I see your element. You got about 4 Humvees out along this.
You're clear.
All right, firing.
Line here. With the space line.
Let me know when you get it. One shoot. Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260.
Come on, fire.
Hey, Roger.
Keep shoot. Keep shoot.
Bushmaster 2-6. We need to move time now.
All right, we just engaged all 8 individuals.
Yeah, we got 2. We're still firing.
Roger.
Got him.
6 is a 2-6. We'll move, but we got 13.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I was on gun.
Bypass.
God damn it, Kyle.
All right. I hit him by heck. All right, you're clear.
All right, I'm just trying to find targets again.
Bushmaster 6. This is Bushmaster 2-6.
Got a bunch of bodies laying there.
All right, we got about 8 individuals.
Yeah, we got one guy crawling around down there, but yeah, we definitely got some. We're shooting some more.
Roger. Hey, you shoot, I'll talk. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18.
Crazy Horse 18. This is Hotel 26. Over.
Roger, currently engaging approximately 8 individuals, KIA, RPGs, and AK-47s.
Hotel 26, you need to move to that location once Crazy Horse is done and get pictures. Over.
Target 20 is the location.
The Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18.
Oh yeah, look at those dead bastards.
Nice. 26, Crazy Horse 18.
Thank you, Spear 02 in flight. Free change 74 this time.
Spear 02, free change.
Nice. Good shoot.
Thank you.
Hotel 26.
Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18.
Crazy Horse 18, Bushmaster 7, go ahead.
Yeah, Bushmaster 7, Crazy Horse 18. Location of bodies, Mike Bravo, 54588617.
Hey, good on the kitchen, that's good.
54588617, over.
It's Crazy Horse 18, that's a good copy. They're on a street in front of an open courtyard with a bunch of blue trucks, a bunch of vehicles in the courtyard.
There's one guy moving down there, but he's wounded.
To the south.
All right, we'll let him know so they can hurry up, get over here.
It's 18. We also have one individual appears to be wounded, trying to crawl away.
Roger, we're going to move down there.
Roger, we'll cease fire.
And we won't shoot anymore. He's getting up.
If he has a weapon though in his hand?
No, I haven't seen one yet. We'll see. You guys got that guy crawling right now on the curb? Yeah, I got him. I put 2 rounds near him, and you guys are shooting over there too, so we'll see. Yeah, roger that.
Postmaster 36 Element, this is Hotel 27, over.
Hotel 27, Postmaster 7, go ahead.
Roger, I'm just trying to make sure that you guys have my turb, over.
Roger, we got the turb.
Okay. Come on, buddy.
All I gotta do is pick up a weapon.
Crazy Horse, this is Bushmaster 5, or Bushmaster 4, break. Here, right below you, right time now. Can you walk us onto that location, over?
This is 2-6, Roger. I'll pop flares. We also have one individual moving. We're looking for weapons. If we see a weapon, we're going to engage. Now, Bushmaster, we have a van that's approaching and picking up the bodies.
Where's that van at?
Right down there by the bodies.
Okay, yeah.
Bushmaster, Crazy Horse, we have individuals going to the scene. Looks like possibly picking up bodies and weapons.
Let me engage.
Hey, we need to stop that so we can get down there. We need to
shoot.
stop. You see my location?
Roger. Break. Crazy Horse 1-8. Request permission to engage individual.
I'm picking up the wounded. Yeah, we're trying to get permission to engage. Come on, let us shoot.
Bushmaster, Crazy Horse 1-8.
We're taking him.
Bushmaster, Crazy Horse 1-8.
This is Bushmaster 7, go ahead.
Roger, we have a black SUV or bongo truck picking up the bodies. Request permission to engage.
Bushmaster 7, Roger. This is Bushmaster 7, Roger, engage.
1-8, engage. Clear.
Come on.
Clear. Clear.
We're engaged as well.
Coming around, clear.
Roger. Trying to,
Clear.
Roger, I lost him in the dust.
I got him.
I'm firing.
George, this is Bushmaster 4. You got any BDA on that truck, over?
You're clear. This is Crazy Horse, stand by.
Not shooting for some reason.
Go
I
ahead.
think the van's disabled.
Go ahead and shoot it.
I got an azimuth limit for some reason.
Left. Clear left. Alright, Bushmaster, Crazy Horse 1-8. A vehicle appears to be disabled. There was approximately 4 to 5 individuals in vehicle moving bodies. Your lead, Bradley, should take the next right. That's cruising east down the road. No more shoot.
Crazy Horse, this is Bushmaster 4. We're moving a dismount element straight south from the Bradley.
I have your Bradley element turning south down the road where the engagements were.
Last call on stations, Bradley Element, say again.
Rogers, Crazy Horse, your lead Bradley just turned south down the road where all the engagements happen. Should have a van in the middle of the road with about 12 to 15 bodies.
Oh yeah, look at that, right through the windshield.
Alright, there was approximately 4 to 5 individuals in that truck, so I'm counting about 12 to 15.
I'd say that's a fairly accurate assessment so far.
Oh, roger that.
One, just be advised, Bushmaster 6 are getting...
Roger, we'll be standing by here.
Labor 5-2 radio.
guy just drove over a body. Yeah.
Viper 5-2, report free change zone 4.
Maybe there's a visual. This guy just drove over a body. Yeah.
Viper 5-2, report free change zone 4.
Roger, we'll be standing by here.
Hey, I need to get the brass to drop ramps. I got a wounded girl. We need to take the rest of mile.
Bushmaster 7, Hotel 26, do you want us to move to your location, over?
Baghdad Radio, Spear 02 in flight, free change zone 1.
Spear 02, free change cruise zone 1.
Bushmaster 6, Hotel 26, over.
Hotel 26, this is Bushmaster 7, Roger, come to our location.
Okay, Roger, we're moving up north on Gaddens, and then we will push east to your location.
For zone 4, en route zone 311, we'll call arrival.
Aggressive 20, Commando 89ers active, port arrival 311.
20.
Baghdad Radio, aggressive 3-4 is off zone 208 for zone 1. We'll call for change.
Aggressive 4-3, zone, correction, aggressive 3-4, zone 30 is closed, report free change zone 1.
Aggressive 3-4, welcome.
Roger.
Roger, that's a negative on evac the two civilian kids to Rusty. They're going to have the IPs link up with us over here, break. IPs will take them up to a local hospital, over. That's your copy, over. Roger that. Flight to tell.
Oh, it's their fault for bringing their kids to a battle.
That's right. Crazy Horse 1A will be setting up north to south, engaging with Hellfire. Roger. Break. Crazy Horse 1A, request permission to engage individual.
Picking up the wounded. Yeah, we're trying to get permission to engage. Come on, let us shoot.
Bushmaster, Crazy Horse 1A.
We're taking him.
Bushmaster, Crazy Horse 1A.
Last calling station, Hotel 26.
Roger, we'll be standing by here.
Hotel 26, do you want your hotel PC element?
And a black vehicle on our target, right to the north of the mall.
Yeah, I would like that, over.
Hotel, Crazy Horse 1A. Moving south by the Moss Dome on that road.
Oh yeah, look at those dead bastards.
So there you've seen it. American justice in action. Extrajudicial executions caught on video by the pilots. There you've seen it. American justice in action. Extrajudicial executions. We have got George. I just wanted to finish by saying that extrajudicial executions. That the wounded. They wouldn't hit the wounded man until he picked up a weapon. If you saw that, and yet when the family arrives in the van, those are all unarmed people, including children, and they hit them. So it was a very strange sense of what they thought the legality of that situation is. That a wounded man on the street they wouldn't shoot until he picked up a weapon, and he never did. And of course, they're laughing about driving over bodies. And the famous line, when it was their fault for bringing kids to a battle. That didn't look like a battle to me. That was a massacre. That's what Chelsea Manning revealed to the American public and went to jail for, where the criminals that we see involved in this action were never punished. And we also see where they were getting needed orders to fire. So there were higher ups that were also directly implicated in this crime. And Chelsea Manning is now refusing to testify in a grand jury against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange for publishing what every American needed to see, and now has been forgotten, goes down the memory hole. George?
It really is shocking. I haven't seen this now in a few years. And when you see it, I mean, it's even more shocking than when I first saw it. I mean, this isn't any kind of a battle. That's a turkey shoot. I mean, this is just simply sadism. You know, we're up here. We can just shoot anyone that we like. You know, they're just insects, cockroaches that we can just kill off at our whim. It's just extraordinary. And I don't even remember, was there any kind of an investigation launched after this video was released? I don't remember.
Yes, into Chelsea Manning, there was an investigation.
Yeah, exactly. Other than that, there was no investigation about the people who were involved in this.
Not that I'm aware of.
Right.
They wanted to find the leaker.
That's it. Yeah.
They found the leaker. They threw her in prison. Now she's in jail because she won't testify against the publisher who published this, so gave the world the evidence that we needed to see to correct American behavior in a war they should never have been engaged in. There was no justification for that invasion of Iraq. There was no authorization by the UN Security Council. There was no Article 51 invocation by the US of self-defense. Iraq was not a threat to the United States. Exactly. And this is the kind, and by the way, we've only seen one incident like this where it was filmed and she was able to leak it. How many other killings were there like this throughout that period? We also know about Blackwater having private security people driving down a road in Baghdad, shooting civilians on the street, reminiscent of the Japanese in Nanjing during the Second World War, just driving up and down the street, killing innocent civilians. This is America. This is our justice system. We were talking about the grand jury. This is extrajudicial assassination and execution. These people were not arrested and tried for anything. And the family that was coming to try to pick them up became victims. And the laughter and the attitude of the soldiers adds insult to the injury of this video, because they don't see this as a serious matter, that they're in a war. It's a video game, obviously.
Exactly.
The sociopathic nature.
And they're in Iraq's country. They're in their country. It's not happening here in the United States. They are actually gone there, thousands of miles away, to these people's country, and you're killing them in their own country. And you think that this is some great, cute exercise.
But George, they were saving them from their dictator, Saddam Hussein. So they, in order to save them from Saddam, they had to be mowed down on the street.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, it really does add an extra layer of the just, I guess, hypocrisy of establishment press, because this was somebody who worked for Reuters. So this is the illegal killing of a journalist or someone who works for Reuters, and now we're seeing Chelsea Manning in prison because she is refusing to testify or to give incriminating sort of statements against Assange, a journalist who published the evidence of this illegal killing of a journalist. So it's sickening. Definitely
can't make this up.
Yeah. But again, it's all been forgotten. And instead, it's all going on about the 2016 election, which incidentally, and all of those, just even talking about the 2016 election, all of that material that WikiLeaks published was all very, very important to know for the public. I mean, this isn't just some trivial gossip. This was crucial information that any well-informed electorate would need to know prior to an election. You mean Hillary Clinton's secret speeches to her Wall Street friends, telling her Wall Street friends, "Hey, don't worry about anything I say during the campaign. I'm going to be your friend when I'm president." That's something that the public needs to know about. So even the whole thing that just saying, "Oh well, the 2016 election." This is all crucial, vital information, consistent with everything else that WikiLeaks has done over the years.
And as accurate as that video was, those emails,
exactly. Yeah.
that the public had a right to know about in a general election. And yet, because WikiLeaks did not get anything on Trump, therefore it was they were favoring Trump over Hillary Clinton, which is complete nonsense. You think that if WikiLeaks got hold of Trump stuff, they wouldn't have published it? We know from Stefania Marizzi, that an Italian journalist who worked at WikiLeaks on the Podesta emails, I believe, that they had some stuff on Trump, and that while they were vetting it, they discovered it had already been published. And I want to add also that Trump was kind of an open book during his campaign. He didn't make any, he didn't hide that he was using racism if he was not a racist himself. That he, we had the Access videotape. We know that he didn't have a high regard for women. He made fun of disabled reporter during a campaign. He was inciting violence in his rallies. There was nothing for him to hide. He was not obviously a politician, where Hillary Clinton was a traditional politician who in those speeches admitted that you have a public and a private position. So Trump only had a public position. He let everybody know what a clown he is. So we didn't really need WikiLeaks.
But as you say, if WikiLeaks had obtained Trump's tax records, there's no question they would have published them. I mean, I don't doubt it for 1 minute that they would have published his tax records.
If I remember correctly, they tried to get the tax records. I think they tried to communicate with Trump team and said, "Give us the tax records." If I may be wrong about that.
Yeah, I
but
think
absolutely.
Yes, I did. Yes, I think they did. Yeah.
Absolutely right. They would have published that because they're publishers and they want to publish information about our leaders and candidates. They would have done that, and because they didn't have Trump emails, does that mean they had to withhold the Clinton ones because they couldn't do both?
Right.
It's absurd.
No.
What would if people knew that they had them and didn't publish them? What would the reaction have been to that? So they were damned if they did, and they were damned if they didn't. It reminds me of the James Risen story. Risen being the New York Times reporter that learned of the wireless wiretapping that was a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment. And he gave that story, of course, to his newspaper, the New York Times. But they decided because an election was coming, it would hurt Bush. This is a liberal newspaper. They didn't want to hurt Bush, so they withheld that stuff until well after the election. It was only when Risen's book was coming out, in which he was going to scoop his own newspaper, that they decided to publish the article.
Right. Well, no, that's exactly right. Also, publishers are under no obligation to publish what you or somebody else wants them to publish. So all the talk about, WikiLeaks doesn't publish anything damaging about Russia, which of course even that isn't true. But even if it were true, WikiLeaks is free to choose what it publishes. If it thinks that the U.S. And its allies are the biggest threat to world peace, and that therefore what they're up to should be exposed, and that therefore they should publish as much information about that, that's their choice. They're not under any obligation for every document from the U.S. government that they publish. They must therefore publish one document from the Kremlin. I mean, it's an absurdity. I mean, publishers publish what they want to publish, and WikiLeaks has a position, which is that the U.S. is an international menace, far more so than any other country. So that's what they think, and there's no point to just sort of balance. Oh well, one document from here, another document from there, and otherwise you're an unreliable source.
Yeah, and the U.S. is not a menace because WikiLeaks thinks they are. It's because the evidence that they have shows that they are. The documents and this video that we just watched. So every publisher, absolutely, as you say, I don't publish everything that's submitted to Consortium News. That's my discretion. That's why they're paying me to make those decisions. And that's the same with WikiLeaks. And of course, WikiLeaks has published 800,000 Russian documents. As John Pilger pointed out in his speech at a rally in Sydney a few days ago, that there was more revealed about Russia in those 800,000 pages, documents, than were in all of this Russiagate nonsense put together.
Right.
So WikiLeaks has done that. And there was also a comment on our website, Consortium News, from a reader saying, well, look at the fact that WikiLeaks never published anything about Israel. So under our comments policy, I could have deleted that because that's false. But instead, I answered that commenter, but was simply with a link to the Israel page on WikiLeaks that has all the documents about Israel that WikiLeaks has published. So people are talking through their, not through their mouths. Let's put it that way. Particularly about the election and the publication of those emails, which were in fact true, which the voters had every right to know about. And it doesn't really matter who the source was because they're documents. As I've said before, if you, as a reporter, and someone is telling you something orally, you have to check that out because they may have a motive, they may be lying. But if they're giving you documents and you verify that they're real, doesn't matter who, the devil himself could give them to you. Are you going to withhold them? Are you going to withhold them because you didn't like the source when this information is true?
Exactly.
So, to cover up from that, which led to the resignations of 4 people, I believe, or even 6 at the Democratic National Committee, including the chairperson, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, because of the revelations. Therefore, they had to be true, or they wouldn't have resigned. They could not have withheld those documents. They had to be published. They were not done other than that they were newsworthy. That is the ultimate discretion that a publisher normally uses. Is this newsworthy? Is it important enough for people to know about? And of course, once that came out, what did the Democrats do? And what they have not stopped doing? Blaming Russia. They did it immediately, right there in July.
Exactly.
That it was Russia, Russia to deflect from the content of the emails.
That's right.
And even if it was Russia, so what?
Of course.
So what?
Yeah. And of course, let's remember when NBC published the sex tape. I called it the sex tape with Donald Trump, where his when he's talking on a hot mic. Now, one could have easily raised all sorts of questions about that. Who leaked that? Why? How did that come out 2 days before the presidential debate?
Right.
NBC was sitting on it for 12 years, and then suddenly it comes out. How was this orchestrated? Yet nobody in that sort of MSNBC, the media, paid any attention to that, but instead into the substance of the tape. Here we've got Trump, we have him talking about women in this disgusting way, and never once wondering who's behind this. How did this was this orchestrated?
Absolutely. No, absolutely, George. They had that tape for some time, and the timing of their release was clearly to hurt Trump. To get maximum value of that bit of news. And people have asked me why, not that I know the answer, why didn't WikiLeaks publish those documents while the primaries were still going on, so that the voters, the Democratic primary voters, would know what that the DNC and Hillary Clinton campaign had done to hurt Bernie Sanders' chances. That had those emails come out earlier, maybe Bernie would have gotten the bounce he needed from that to beat her, despite what they did to try to cheat him out of it. And my only answer could be is they weren't ready for publication. They received them when they received them. They have to vet them. And vetting documents like that is a different process than a written article where the editor will go back to the reporter and go to the sources and make sure that and get another source if necessary. It's a different process. There were an enormous amount of emails, 50,000 or more. had to be made sure that not for that technical process that these were not fakes, and they weren't. As we all know, WikiLeaks has never published fakes because of the process they go through. And therefore, they were ready when they were ready. And there's also Stefania Marizzi, who wrote a very good piece for us in Consortium about this process, absolutely swears, because she worked directly on it with WikiLeaks, with Assange, that the email dump was already planned before that Hollywood Access tape that you referred to on NBC was aired. There were some people who said that it was timed for the same day in order to blunt, or right after that, to blunt the impact of the Hollywood. And she said that they had already scheduled publication for that day, and then the Hollywood Access tape came out. That was a coincidence.
Right.
But you know, we've seen today, George, and I've never seen the full video till today. I've seen parts of it.
That's right. I've only seen parts of it. I haven't seen the full 17 minutes. That's why it seems. I know it's a lot more shocking than I remember it. I mean, it's quite horrifying. And when you listen to the commentary, the utter frivolity, the sadism of these people, it's really appalling.
I would say the racism too, because these are not human beings for them.
That's right.
How these people are a threat to these men up in thousands of feet in the air.
That's right. Exactly.
And even the fact that these Bradley tanks show up shortly after, right? That means they could have engaged these guys on the ground. Why didn't they? Why did they do it from the air?
That's right.
They only came in afterward and drove over some bodies.
Right. Yeah. It's I mean, it has no resemblance whatsoever to war. I mean, it's really like a torture chamber. Somebody chains you up, and you can do what you like to the person that was chained up in the torture chamber.
Absolutely. Listen, I want to introduce Greg Pallas. I'm really happy to see Greg appearing we only have about 15 minutes, but let's spend that time with Greg. Greg, we've been talking about the Chelsea Manning jailing today for refusing to testify to the grand jury. And we just aired the full 17-minute video of the collateral murder, the very important video that Chelsea Manning had leaked to WikiLeaks. Greg, welcome to the Vigil. Please give us your take on Chelsea Manning and what's happened today. We can't hear you. You have to go to the bottom of your screen on the bottom left and click on that green symbol, which then allows you to allow your computer mic to be used. You're now muted. Okay, now you have to be unmuted. You have to unmute yourself. There you go. Greg, you can hear us. All right.
I can
Thank
hear
you so much for coming on. That's great to see you.
Yes, well, today is a special, sad, and horrific day in the annals of the free press with the re-imprisonment of Chelsea Manning, a great American hero. And what really sickens me is that you had the New York Times and the Washington Post preening about the reports it did based on what they obtained from Manning through WikiLeaks, and collecting awards, and they're silent. In fact, at times they've even applauded the jailing of their source. Now, for those who don't know me, I'm Greg Pallas, and I was an investigative reporter for the Guardian newspapers and for BBC Television Newsnight, and as well for a program called Dispatches in England, Channel 4. It's like their 60 Minutes if you're American to get a concept. And I have to say that I relied on the revelations from Chelsea Manning. In fact, for example, terrible things about our government. I looked at the State Department cables, something that hasn't come out in the U.S., but was on the front page of The Guardian. In the WikiLeaks cables, we found out that 17 months before the Deepwater Horizon exploded in the Gulf, blew out in the Gulf. That was a British petroleum operation on a trans-ocean rig. That a British Petroleum operation on a Transocean rig, same thing, had blown out in the Caspian Sea, and it was covered up. It was covered up. It was done. British Petroleum covered it up. Exxon, who was a partner, covered it up. Chevron covered it up. They covered it up with the connivance of the U.S. State Department under Condi Rice, with the government, with the dictatorship of Azerbaijan. So these oil companies covered up a blowout, which was caused by the use of what's called quick dry cement. And that was the cement that was used in the Gulf. The Department of Interior tried to stop the work of the Deepwater Horizon, saying it was in an unsafe and untested area. And if they had no knowledge of the blowout 17 months before in the Caspian Sea, 11 men were incinerated because of the lie and the cover-up by the U.S. State Department and the oil companies. And we only found out about it. I found out about it because I talked to insiders who worked on the rig in the Caspian Sea for BP. But it was confirmed by the, before I even got my report out, it was confirmed by the documents, by the State Department documents released by Chelsea Manning. Because we know about the stuff in Iraq, we know about some other things, but this is a story that's never even made it to America. Chelsea Manning, if his information or her information had gotten out earlier, those 11 men would not have died, and the Gulf Coast of the United States would not have been decimated, and lives and fortune and livelihoods ruined. His actions were absolutely heroic, and I have no doubt that they've already saved lives in other cases. This was a life-saving purpose for which he sacrificed enormously. And Barack Obama, shame on him, had him imprisoned, but then realized, that caved into the pressure about the injustice. That was caving into pressure we have to apply again. So all I want to say is that as a newsman, it makes me sick that I use WikiLeaks as a news source. The New York Times does. The Washington Post does. Where the hell are they on protecting their sources? This is dangerous stuff. I'm telling you right now, don't go to the New York Times if you have a story. Don't go to the Washington Post. Go to gregpalast.com, because I would rather go to prison than give up a source. Screw those guys. They are literally, the American news establishment is a threat to the freedom of the press. What they want is a news monopoly. They don't want a free press. They want the press that they control. And that means keeping Manning locked up. They want to squeeze him like an orange, then throw him in the garbage.
If they don't get what they want out of him.
Yeah, in other words, they want, and then, and they're happy to basically turn state's evidence. This is a horrific thing that these guys are doing. To me, the silence of the media lambs makes me just want to vomit. And I just want to thank, and I hope the word gets to him. Please, if there's any way to let Chelsea Manning know, damn courageous work, and let Assange know that, people are confusing how they feel about Julian Assange's personality or what he's personally done or haven't done in treatment of women or not. That's not the point. This is about WikiLeaks as a news source. Let's stay with the topic here. You may not like me or my hat or my lack of hair. You may not like how I talk. You may not like anything about me. Read my reports, true or false. I'm a source of news. So my report, which went out on the Deepwater Horizon, and the fact that 11 men were incinerated, that could have been prevented if we simply had Chelsea Manning's information even earlier. His material is life-saving and a tremendous news source, which could have only come to us via WikiLeaks. And so I have to thank my sources. And for those who remain unnamed, I'll keep them unnamed. And unlike the Times and the Post, I will not give you up or applaud when you go to jail. I love when Christoph, who used Manning's material, said that the sentence for Manning was too harsh. Too harsh? Since when do you applaud your sources going to prison for giving you a story? There's language I would like to use, but I'd like to repeat this story on other channels. But you have no idea how angry this makes me, and and I just can't. I was just a couple of weeks ago in the New York Times actually invited me in, believe it or not, to do some work with them. And it just really, I'll have to tell you the truth. I was ill. I can't even look at these people. I can't even look at these people. You know, they're not reporters. They're repeaters of the government statements, and that's it. And yeah, they took a few things from WikiLeaks if they decided it was valuable to go after the little splits in the elite. They didn't like Bush. They don't like Trump. But they don't like it if it goes after, God forbid, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was, what you uncovered there in WikiLeaks, by the way. Sorry if I'm in the filibuster here, but I'm really whipped up. What WikiLeaks uncovered, people have to understand with the Democratic National Committee documents. This was about a crime. You're not allowed under federal election law to take money for, remember, there's limits on how much a person can give to a campaign. There's a $2,000 limit, but there's a 200-some thousand. You can put in $250,000 almost into a political party. So to break the law, this is a crime. This is a go to jail crime. Debbie Wasserman Schultz took money and resources the DNC paid for, but under this high limit, and effectively shoved it into the Hillary Clinton campaign, which has a low limit, and thereby use this as a scam to basically using the DNC as a money laundering operations for illegal contributions to Hillary Clinton. And you believe me, Hillary absolutely knew about it. These people should be in prison. And by the way, it's not just a minor footnote. Wasserman Schultz has said that Bernie Sanders should not be allowed into the Democratic Party unless he denounces Maduro of Venezuela as a dictator, the guy who's been elected. And she says we should endorse Juan Guaido because he is supposedly the legitimate president who's never run for anything. These people are allergic to democracy. They're allergic to a free press. And I'm with you, Chelsea Manning. And I don't know if I'd have the cojones to do what you're doing. But God bless you from real journalists.
Well, thank you, Greg, for that burst of information and insight. And we're not exactly a family program, so you could have gone a little bit off the edge with your language if you wanted to.
I want to pass this around to the to all the kindergartens I can. I think we got to get the kids before they're destroyed by
you're absolutely right. Thank you
for the processing job done in our schools. They come out going, the truth is the New York Times. The truth is the LA Times. So I'm just and therefore I just want to thank. And I've never been able to give much of a chance to thank WikiLeaks and thank Chelsea Manning for the tremendous work and the information I've used again and again. Those files are people really should read that because it's really about what your government and what your elite's doing to you. They don't want you to see this. And you're absolutely right. Damn it. I mean, you don't look at, every source has a reason to turn over information. The question is it true? Even your mother, when she says, so how are you doing? What she means is, so are you looking for a job? There's always, everyone has an ulterior motive, including mom. But that's not the point. We all have used whistleblowers who have an ulterior motive. Sometimes we have to disclose it. But the most important thing is this is how we get the truth out. And what hurt them was not WikiLeaks. What hurt these guys was the truth.
I can't think of a better way to end this program except to say, please, all of you out there who have stories, go to Greg Palast and give him that story. But there's also competition, wikileaks.org. They will publish and protect their sources as well.
Yes.
Greg, thank you so much for coming on. You said more in 10 minutes than I think we said in the previous 2.5 hours. So I hope you can come back again.
For you. So I just, I need something that's a little bit of an easy bite for the American audience.
Well, let me ask you, since we have 5 minutes left, about the grand jury system. Do you have experience with this? And what do you think they were trying to do with her? She'd already given all these answers were given during her court martial. Why were they dragging her in again without defense being there, no counsel, no, it's not public. Why do you think they were trying to do this?
Well, it's an entrapment game.
Yeah.
She got Chelsea Manning gave up everything she had to give in the court process. That was the deal. That's what she said. She, gave all the information back. What, she said one thing, her thing is open information. So it was an entrapment deal because they knew, she wouldn't answer questions about WikiLeaks. They knew that because, by the way, they speak to you in advance. I want you to know that. Just like my friend Randy Credico, who testified against Roger Stone. They first say to you, here's what we're going to, you get a notice, and here's what you're going to, here's the information. So they know in advance, and they know that Chelsea Manning couldn't take the fifth because she has immunity and a pardon. And so it's an entrapment. There's just nothing. They know that. What are they going to learn that they haven't learned already? Absolutely zero zorch. So I think it was absolutely entrapment. Absolutely.
With that, we come to the conclusion of the 19th vigil for Julian Assange. I wanted to thank our guests, Brian Becker, Lee Stranahan, John Kiriakou, George Samueli, and Greg Palast, and my co-host, Elizabeth Voss. And it turned out to be a pretty good vigil on a day, as you said, Greg, which was pretty historic. And the courage that Chelsea Manning has shown not to testify in a grand jury against Julian Assange. So I thank everyone again and welcome you back next week. And Greg, please come back again and come back earlier, because we could do a whole 3 hours with you, I think, without having to ask you anything. So anyway, thank you all, and we'll see you next week. This is Joel Lauria saying goodbye.